Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki. E hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. So just a little bit of tikanga, which is like a protocol around when we're doing a karakia. If you arrive during when a karakia is happening, it's a good idea just to wait at the door, not walk in and keep walking in through it. So just in the future, if you're late, just pause where you are and you can listen and join in from there. So welcome everyone to today's strategy and policy meeting. Please let me or the Democracy Advisor Cyrus know if you intend to leave the meeting. Just a wee note, we have Andrea Bruce here, welcome from National Geographic. Give us a wave. Andrea's taking some photos because, as we're all aware, we've got a pretty exciting council this year with 11 wahine, 11 women, and so Andrea is capturing that for National Geographic today. So she said she'll move around quietly, but just to explain to people what's happening. Morning tea will be at 10:30am, and just a note, because last week it came up, can you make sure that your electronic devices are on silent mode? It's easy to forget if you've had it on earlier. I should also note that this meeting will be live streamed, which we were aware of last week. I'm pleased to let you know about the National Geographic. I've already said that, got ahead of myself. So I'm just going to call for any apologies. I have one for Councillor Young, who will be a little bit late for the meeting. Are there any other apologies this morning? No. So I move the motion that Strategy and Policy Committee accepts apologies for lateness for Councillor Young. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sparrow, thank you. And now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please press the green button. Those to the contrary, please press the red. He's trying. Is it working? Nope. So I declare the motion carried. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest that they may have in relation to any items on the agenda. I see there are none. Confirmation of minutes. I move the motion that the Strategy and Policy Committee approve the minutes of the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting held on the 5th of February, having been circulated, and that they be taken and read as and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons. I now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Those in favour, press 1. Those to the contrary, press 2. I declare the motion carried. And there are no items not on the agenda this morning. So public participation. This morning we have one public participant. We've got Sasha Tilley here from the Fringe Festival. So Sasha, no mai haere mai. You can come up and sit at the table, and you've got someone else with you, which is fantastic. There's the microphones there, just make sure you turn them on when you're speaking, because then they get picked up in our live stream. And so both these wonderful people have come to talk to us about the Fringe Festival this morning, and so you have 10 minutes, and if you do want to allow some time for questions, that could be good, because I'm sure there will be some. Thank you.
Kia ora everyone. So this is Rose Jang, who is our festival coordinator for New Zealand Fringe. I am the recently appointed festival director, so I thought I'd just talk to you about what Fringe is. I'm taking this as a base level that everyone here doesn't know. So just from the go. Wellington New Zealand Fringe Festival is our open access arts festival. That means anyone can register and produce a show. In the Fringe model, all ticket proceeds go directly to artists. This is our 30th anniversary and our biggest festival yet, with 150 events in over 40 venues around Wellington and the Kapiti Coast, including theatre, comedy, circus, dance, visual arts, music, spoken word, film, and much more. Fringe presents work from emerging artists and from established performers who are testing new works and new art forms. We host a number of Wellington and New Zealand premieres. This year, 60% of our events are produced from Wellington-based artists, 20% from other places around the country, and 20% international artists from Australia, the UK, the US, Canada, and Spain, to name a few. There are Fringe festivals all around the world, but New Zealand Fringe in Wellington is the oldest and the biggest establish Fringe in New Zealand. We have relationships with Fringes in other countries who send producers and scouts here and often take our shows over there. This year we have producers attending from Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Edinburgh, New York City and Sweden. Fringe has been a launching pad for many artists on stage and behind the curtain. Many Fringe artists have founded their own companies and now head other major festivals like the Auckland Arts Festival, the Dunedin Fringe and the Darwin Arts Festival. Many well-known Kiwis have started their careers here, including James Nakise, Sophie Hambleton of Westside, Robin Malcolm of Outrageous Fortune, and of course, The Flight of the Conchords and Taika Waititi. So Fringe artists go on to win Oscars. Yeah.
The Fringe is one of the most accessible ways to access the arts in Wellington, with most tickets priced around $15 to $20 and many shows which are free or koha. We host shows in traditional venues like Bats and Circa, and we also host shows in less traditional venues. This year we have shows in the Wellington Chocolate Factory, J&M Fast Foods, in coffee shops, art galleries, on Instagram, and in people's lounges. It's also a very accessible festival for the audiences in terms of the range of shows that they get to see. It's a low price, and their attendance of the audiences translates into dollars into the pockets of the artists, with 100% of the ticket price going to the artists. And of course, audiences are spending their money in restaurants, cafes, bars, shops, and hotels in Wellington.
So in terms of our relationship with Wellington City Council, they've been a long-time core supporter of the Fringe. So I tried to go right back to find some, figures. And I definitely found that the council has been a supporter since at least 1993, when the Fringe Arts Trust was founded. In terms of our records of funding, from 2011, we were at $85,000 support from council. This year, for 2020 and 2021, we're at $145,000. So that funding goes directly into supporting our staff. This is the first time we've actually managed to have a year-round full-time staff involved in running the festival, which is very exciting in terms of our sustainability for artists. And hopefully we're leading into that to having some part-time staff for the remainder of the year as well.
So we would love to invite all of you to our VIP launch. It is our 30th anniversary festival this year, so we are launching an exhibition which will include stories and memorabilia from folks who have participated in the Fringe over the last 30 years, and we will also have an opening gala showcase. That's on Thursday the 27th of February at Te Awaha, and we've provided invitations for you as well as the program guide, so you can have a look at our shows.
Ngā mihi kia kōrua. We do have a few pātai. We've got a few questions. So we've got our first question from Councillor Paul.
Ata Marie, and ngā mihi kia kōrua, hoki. He whairawa atu tō kōrua mahi. Just saying, good morning and thank you so much for your mahi. I thought it was really awesome to hear that 60% of the artists will be from Pōneke, from Wellington. And just thinking about our status as the arts and cultural capital here in Aotearoa, I was just wondering what you thought maybe some of the key issues are here in Wellington in terms of retaining those artists to live here.
Venues is a huge one. The great thing about Fringe is that there is a lot of bring your own venues and a lot of pop-up spaces, but in terms of year-round venues for people to be able to represent their work outside of Fringe time, that becomes a little bit harder. We had some amazing things like Urban Dream Brokerage, obviously with the earthquake strengthening of buildings and those being put into place. It's become harder to use found spaces throughout the year. That's definitely one of the big ones.
Thank you, Councillor Young.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation. Of course, Fringe is fantastic, but I must say it is a bit daunting looking at the program. So I wonder if you could give councillors any advice on what they should go and see, or whether, I think your advice to me was potluck, but also the fact, perhaps you could just explain that some of the shows they're not 3-hour shows, and just perhaps talk them through the way the program works.
So our program is split into different categories. So most festivals will go theatre, film, comedy, split them into categories. We found over the years that most of our events don't sit in one genre. So our program is split into internationals, family-friendly shows that happen outdoors, performance parts, eyes and ears bits, which is film, visual art, audio, music, and then there's naughty bits, which is things that happen later at night or have some content that's maybe not great for your children to bring along to, but that's why we also have the family-friendly section. The average length of time for a Fringe show is 60 minutes. A lot of them will be under that, about 45, and a lot of them are works in development and things. And because the average price is about $18, it's pretty accessible to just pop in for a 50-minute show and then scale off.
Which is, you talked about bring your own venues. How do you bring your own venue? Because that could solve all sorts of problems for us in Wellington.
So that's we have relationships with a lot of the usual venues and art galleries around town, but sometimes someone will go, oh, my friend owns a bar and I'd like to perform in that. So it's bringing that, or someone's lounge becomes a BYO.
Thank you. Mayor Foster.
Look, thank you and congratulations. My question was, you said that the artists get all the proceeds from ticket sales. So things like, the venues are basically paid for by whatever deal the artists have done. If they're just bringing people to a venue, sometimes the venue operator presumes going, that's cool because I can sell drink and food, etc. to them. Is that kind of the way it works, and the promotion then is just done through the Fringe, and that's paid for by the likes of council and other sponsors? Is that the guts of it?
Yes. So we there is a small inside fee for Fringe, which covers the cost of running our ticketing system and hosting a box office and having our front of house staff help out at venues. Most venues are either a profit share, so we'll take maybe 15 to 20% of ticket sales. Some is a straight hire fee, which can range from $20 to $100 per night, depending on the size of the space. But it's all of the ticket revenue, apart from that small inside fee.
So it's up to the artist to sort out the arrangement for the venue, effectively?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I can see the attraction of BYO.
Yeah.
Thank you. Probably got time for one more question. Councillor O'Neill.
Yep, really quickly, I just wanted to say a big thank you. I've been able to write and produce shows from high school age with such an accessible model. My question was around mid-sized venue and rehearsal spaces in Wellington. We know that it's quite tight, so I wanted to ask if you had sort of any insight, or if the struggle for rehearsal space has also been a bit of an issue for some of your artists.
Yeah, it's yes, very much so. Again, it's in the places that you would ordinarily kind of go to because they're empty floors of office buildings. Anvil House has been a really great place for people to rehearse, but obviously that's just closing now. So it's not necessarily that there's not the spaces, it's the accessibility about the funding to be able to afford most of the spaces, because many of our commercial rental properties are outside of our emerging artists. Yeah.
Ngā mihi anō. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us about the Fringe Festival. It's really great to hear some details and to understand a little bit of the ins and outs of how it all fits together. So we'll look forward to participating and attending some of the events. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so councillors, I'd just like to start by letting you know that we will be changing the order of the items morning, and that will be under Standing Order 3.9.2, and that's basically just around the fact that we've had some feedback from the officers around the submission, and it just gives us councillors and officers a little bit of time to organise any amendments that may need to happen or any tweaks. So we will start with item 2.1, which is the Safer Speeds hearing subcommittee, which I envisage will be a very quick discussion, and then item 2.3, which is a review of the parking policy, and then we will finish with item 2.1, which is the submission on the urban development bill. So if everyone is in agreement with that, we will get underway. Thank you. So we will begin with item 2.2, which I think Councillor Condé has done an excellent job pulling everything together, and as have the officers, so thank you very much. Let you introduce the report.
Sure. Very quickly, this is just setting up a subcommittee for us to be able to hear submissions on the Safer Speeds consultation that we put out and passed last week. So there's a couple of quick amendments adding Councillor Matthews and Councillor Foon onto the subcommittee, which means that we've had to increase the quorum to 5 members because that's just the rules about what the quorum is for the number of people. So very straightforward. I'm happy to move this.
Do you have a seconder?
Hopefully.
Councillor Fitzsimons, would you like to speak? Yeah. Thank you. So being that there is no debate, I guess there's no right of reply needed. So now, it was a great speech. I now put the motion which has been moved and seconded, so those in favour please press 1 and those to the contrary please press 2. That was very straightforward. I declare the motion carried. That was very quick. So we can be that efficient. All right, so we're now going to move on to item 2.3, which is the review of the parking policies, the proposed policy consultation document. And I now invite Councillor Condé to introduce the report.
Kia ora anō. Hello again. All right. So the parking policy review has been a long time in the making, and we're voting today on taking this parking policy out for consultation with the public so that we can hear their views and they can help us to shape this framework that we have. Now, my first thing that I want to say about the parking policy is that it's not really about parking. The parking policy is really about the kind of city that we want to build. The parking policy is about the fact that Wellingtonians have told us that we want more public transport, we want more bus lanes, we want to be able to walk and cycle more easily, which means that we need to use some of our road space to provide cycleways, to widen footpaths. It's about providing more urban infrastructure like street trees. We know that people would like to live in a greener city. All of these things that Wellingtonians have told us that they want their city to look like means that we have to reprioritise some of our parking space. So the parking policy is about parking, but it's not really about parking. It's about the kind of city that we're trying to build for Wellingtonians. The policy itself is a framework and a toolkit. So there's nothing in here that will propose any specific changes to any parking on any street in Wellington. This is a framework and a toolkit that will allow us, when we're making other kinds of policy decisions that impact on parking, it will give us a way to work through those implications. So when we're making decisions about Let's Get Welly Moving and the bus priority work that we've all approved to go forward, when we're looking at bringing in bus lanes, that will have an impact on parking on our streets. And this parking policy will give us a framework and a toolkit to work through the implications of that. The idea of the policy is that we're trying to future-proof and give ourselves options for the future. We would like this policy to set us up for the next 10 years and give us a framework that will allow us to work through lots of issues that might come up. So the intention here is not that everything in this policy will be implemented immediately. That's not the idea. The idea is that the policy has been written to give us some wiggle room, to give us some ability to future-proof and accommodate things as they change over the next decade. The policy has therefore shown us some principles of what we're prioritising when we're looking at our road space and parking. It's got a hierarchy that shows what we're going to give our priorities to in terms of our on-road space. As I would kind of re-emphasise, it doesn't make any changes to parking spaces on our streets. It doesn't actually change any times or any charges. It makes provision for those things to be possible in the future, but it doesn't make any concrete changes at the moment. There's nothing in this parking policy as well that requires any parking to be removed. So you might hear during the debate about pressures to reduce the amount of parking. This parking policy is not trying to reduce the amount of parking. That's not its objective. Its objective is to accommodate the fact that we are seeing increased demand we're seeing reducing supply of parking in our city because of other policy decisions that we're making. So the intention of this policy is not to reduce parking in the city. The intention of this policy is to allow us to make decisions and have a framework to make decisions when we make policy decisions that will reduce parking. So when we make a decision to bring in a new bus lane under Let's Get Wellington Moving that will impact on parking, that's a policy decision that does reduce parking. This framework is not about reducing parking. That's not its objective. Its objective is just to allow us to make those prioritisations as we make other policy decisions that will create an impact on supply of parking. The other thing I would just note is that this policy is just focused on council parking, which is mostly on-street parking. We have very little off-street parking that the council provides. And so we have limited ability to affect private parking providers and private parking buildings. So this parking policy is strongly focused on council-provided parking, which is mostly on-street parking. So I'm really happy to move this paper. And can we get a seconder, please?
Someone like to second the paper?
Councillor Foon.
Councillor Foon, would you like to speak to that? You can choose to withhold your right if you'd like to. Thank you. We'll open up now for debate. Would you like to bring your amendment forward now, Councillor Matthews?
Kia ora koutou. I just want to say how happy I am that to have the issue of accessibility so front and centre in this paper, and a hierarchy that puts the needs of disabled people near the top is very a wonderful thing to see. And to commend the work not only of this policy but also the mobility parking spaces review, which will also inform actions going forward. So I'd like to move an amendment that just makes it even clearer that this policy will give us the opportunity to implement more and better quality mobility spaces. That means, yes, there is through the mobility parking spaces report, we saw that people were very concerned about the number and placement of mobility parks in the central city to access all those important services, but also the quality of those parks. So they might mean, for example, is the ramp appropriate? Is the curb cutting right? Is there the ability to sort of safely manoeuvre a wheelchair to and from the vehicle? So those issues, I'm really happy to see a parking policy that is going to put those needs of people that require mobility parks. Around 18% of our population has a mobility issue, and some of those, of course, will be accessing mobility car parks. So really happy to see that in the paper in this amendment, just make that even clearer to disabled Wellingtonians and visitors that we understand and support them in being able to access a car park.
And have you got a seconder? Thank you. Councillor O'Neill, would you like to speak?
Yeah, sure. Just really briefly. So, really happy to tautoko Councillor Matthews for this amendment as well. I think it's incredibly important that we take this in as a part of the four objectives when we're designing cities as well. We know that this is an issue that often is left off the table, and so really pleased to support this as well. So I'll leave it short and sharp.
Fantastic. Well done. What good role modelling. Would anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Councillor Condi.
Just very quickly to say, as a portfolio leader, I support this amendment and I understand that the officers are comfortable with it as well.
Mayor Foster, did you say yes because you'd like to speak? You're happy to support?
The yes was... Can I ask a question?
Would you like to ask a question, Councillor Young?
Wondering what data we have about the number of mobility parks and the requirements for them, because I know when my parents were getting older, the fun of taking them around in wheelchairs. Let's hope my children do it for me in a long time away. The other thing is, it's not just people in wheelchairs, it's also, parents with young children and pushchairs and things. And I wonder whether this is being too specific and just how much information we have about it before we do it, because, young old mums, fathers, whatever they are, carers, children in buggies, they're a nightmare, and often worse than someone in a wheelchair who knows what they need to do, whereas the children are just being disruptive, as children are.
So there's kind of multiple questions in there, but you're wanting some feedback on how many spaces we currently have? Okay, so you can answer that in your right of reply, Councillor Matthews. Yeah. Great. Councillor Rush, would you like to speak?
Yeah, just an observation. Obviously, I'll support this amendment, but the biggest barrier really in terms of access is distance. And people that commute into the town, into Wellington, for whatever reason, not availing themselves of very good public transport that we have here, obviously are doing that for reasons which we don't know. But certainly the biggest barrier in terms of accessibility is the distance that people live from where their place of work is, and we shouldn't forget that.
Thank you. Being that there's no more debate, would you like to do your right of reply, and you can acknowledge?
Kia ora, colleagues. So currently, at the time of the writing of the mobility parking review, we had 66 mobility car parks in the CBD and 167 around the suburbs and our facilities. But I guess that we need to look at that there's, in Wellington, issued in 2018 were 3,223 mobility permits long-term and 204 short-term. So there is clearly, a big unmet need. Mobility parks may not be used as fully as other parks, so that study did find that, but it's the ability, when you can, to go and use one, and that might be for a shorter period. On the other issues, yes, and the point that this is an amendment to the needs of those other users are mentioned, and we, other specialist car parks are possible, but it's our ability to enforce those, whereas mobility parks, are more enforceable. And yes, I take the point about distance. The other issues that related to this are public transport may not be accessible for all Wellingtonians, and also the housing is, we have a shortage of accessible housing. So disabled people often find, particularly with mobility issues, that they don't have a lot of choice about where they can live. And that's another huge issue for our city. So, these kind of issues are compounding upon each other for disabled Wellingtonians.
Thank you. Being that there's no further debate on this amendment, we'll put it to the vote. So those in favour, press the green button. Those to the contrary, press the red. It was very straightforward again. That was carried. Thank you. So next on our... Councillor O'Neill seconded that. Not the substantive. Councillor Foon seconded the substantive. So it's Councillor Free. So Councillor Free, would you like to speak to your amendment now? We're just going to work our way down the list.
We have got a few. Look, I'm going to keep it really brief, and I will just speak to the amendment. And already in the debate, I've actually picked up that Councillor Rush commented in relation to the mobility parking that even though we have supposedly excellent public transport, there are barriers to people taking it up. He actually said we don't know what they are. And then Councillor Matthews mentioned there are potentially public transport barriers for disabled people using public transport, but we don't necessarily know what they are. There are also barriers for people walking and cycling. Again, we don't necessarily know what they are. I was minded to bring a whole lot of other more specific amendments. I was discouraged by my colleagues because this is primarily about an engagement process. I think this is the ideal opportunity as we are trying to encourage this is about trying to encourage mode shift. A little bit of it will be about putting in cycle lanes and bus lanes and doing things to make those modes more attractive and appealing and more efficient and reliable. But the flip side to that is we need people to be using these other modes. And so one of my first part to my amendment is just to say we'll obviously need to be providing more infrastructure. We'll need to be talking to Greater Wellington. We'll want to be doing that in a coherent fashion. That's the first part. But the second part is this is actually an opportunity to find out whether it's price, whether it's lack of service, whether it's the kind of design around the bus stops, whether it's the timetabling uncertainties or what it is that actually we could be working on in collaboration with our partners to try and actually encourage people to take up these other modes. So I think that they're reasonably straightforward amendments. I hope they do have good support. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you say that Councillor Sparrow is seconding?
Would
you like to speak to it?
Councillor Free has expressed things so well there is no need.
So no. Okay, Councillor Pennant, you're next up to speak. Did you want to go on the main speaking order? Would anyone like to speak to this amendment? Mayor Foster.
I 100% agree with the intent. Just the language is probably not quite in line with what the policy is about. I mean, when Councillor Condi introduced the paper, the intent is not. The intent of the policy is not to reduce parking demand. The intent of the policy is to achieve a whole lot of other things about the city we want. Reduction in parking demand is a outcome in some cases of that. Reduction in parking supply probably more than demand, but I'm not sure that that's actually the deliberate intent of the policy. And with respect to the second one, I agree with the intent. I just wonder how wide it is going to make the feedback that we might be getting, because that could encompass just about everything. You could say, I haven't got a cycleway in somewhere. We need to redesign a cycleway in somewhere else. You know, I mean, that's kind of not what this policy is about. So I agree with the intent, but it's not the purpose of this. And I think, Jill, the feedback that you gave on some amendments which were proposed earlier is we've got to keep them within the scope of what the paper is about, because otherwise we are going to stray all over the place, and there's a danger people can put almost anything into any paper. So I'm not sure even that the 616 is actually within the scope of the paper.
Yeah, I might actually see if we can get. Are you able to make any comment on that? How that would affect it, because that does affect the consultation quite significantly.
Through you, Chair, certainly the points made by the Mayor are relevant. There is nothing fundamental from an officer perspective that we would disagree with in the intent of what's being said here. Certainly 16 would have implications as to how you both run, assess and then deal with the consultation information that you get back, and what expectation you create from that. So that would create a resourcing and a processing question that we would then have to come back to committee with.
So I might just put that back to you, Deputy Mayor Free. Do you want to persevere and see if you have support for that, or that's your right? Yes, Calvert.
David, can you tell us how extensive that will be? I mean, you've only just seen this, obviously, and therefore I think you should give us some advice as to how extensive the implications of doing that might be. I mean, we don't know what people will say, but they could say an awful lot. So I'd appreciate your advice.
Through you, Chair, as you've stated, I have only just seen that, and there would be multiple ways that you could approach effectively what is outlined there, which could contain the scope of the questions being asked and the expectation of what happens with that information afterwards in a way that could be managed, or it could be at the other end of the spectrum that creates quite a burden. So we haven't obviously had the opportunity to process that and understand what the implications of that would be.
Yes, I think so, councillors. I think it's just really important to note that this doesn't have officer support at this stage, does it? You haven't got officers, because it is really important for us to understand the implications. If when we add something in, there is a.
I'm trying to be. Certainly, as I've stated, that the intent certainly of point 15 noted understood. I take the Mayor's point around the reducing the demand of parking is a component of the policy, not the be-all and end-all of it. But I think the wording is specific to that aspect of it, so I'm less concerned about that one. It is certainly intent.
Transport strategy.
Yep. Very useful suggestion. The alternative to 16 is that in the development of the transport strategy, we could be more explicit about those questions and take that as an undertaking.
I think we might adjourn because this is clearly causing some challenges. We'll just adjourn for a couple of minutes and I'll have a chat with Councillor Condi, who obviously is the portfolio leader. It is important to get the right advice from officers just to make sure that we're not stepping into something that is going to cause us big issues, but officers have said that they are comfortable with us continuing to debate this amendment. So the next speaker on the list is Councillor Rush. Oh, sorry, Calvert, you were about to speak. Sorry.
I'm not going to support this amendment. I think we're forgetting the purpose of it, and with all due respect to Councillor Condi, I think we need to go back to what the actual document says on page 45 of our documents, the purpose of this parking policy and the history that's led us to be here. This is about managing on-street parking. It is not about reducing demand. That's not where we went out to do the pre-engagement. And what's going to happen is this policy is going to get hijacked, literally, by people's personal agendas on other policy matters. And what's going to happen, and this meeting is going to just probably turn into a bit of a debacle, actually, with even if you look at some of the amendments that were flying around yesterday, what Wellingtonians want us is to get on and effectively govern. They don't want us trying to be policy analysts and trying to do the work of officers. Now, we have been out doing pre-engagement. There's been a lot of work by officers that know a lot more than us. We need an opportunity for the public to contribute, but we've got to make it easy and simple for the public to understand what we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to do is we're trying to achieve how we best manage a limited supply of on-street parking to support a wide variety of people. Now, if we accepted this, and I look at number 16, well, to seek feedback on barriers to reducing the need to use private vehicles. Well, what about how are we going to, ensure that we still support economic activity that actually provides the jobs that funds people's lifestyles and it funds people just the basics to live. So we're trying to get this policy to be all and everything for everyone when we need to stick to our knitting, get back to basics and actually stop wasting time, stop wasting our officers' time and stop adding more burden to them. If you look at our forward work program that we had in last training, we kept adding extra bits on. We never achieved half of what we wanted to achieve. We've got to keep things simple, but more importantly, we've got to make it simple for the public to contribute. And if we keep adding stuff in like this, it's going to get hidden. And then you're going to come back and say, well, no one said anything, so yeah, let's go ahead with it. And so, but people have missed it because what people are interested in is how are we going to manage limited space for parking? And if you think about your constituents, in particular over the last 3 years, I know we've heard from people from Miramar, Northland, Wadestown. They want to know is what will happen for them. And what will happen, we've lost over 1,700 off-street car parking since the November 2016 quake. I don't see anybody thinking about what impact that has done. And all you're wanting to try to do is keep reducing demand. The purpose of this is to manage our on-street parking. So I would just counsel everyone here to think about your role as governors, what we're here to do. Let us get on and get through and get on our business quickly and efficiently and effectively.
Thank you. Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Totally support Councillor Calvert's submission there. I disagree that this policy is about more than parking. This, if you look at the history, this is slated for review in the Wellington Urban Growth Plan and Transport Strategy 2014 to 2043. And there it is, one of many things, including addressing public transport, cycling, and other active modes of transport. And all of these things have their own policies, all of which integrate under the revised transport strategy, which will be developed in 2020. And that is the right place to be asking the sort of questions I think Councillor Free would like to ask. So from my point of view, I agree with Councillor Calvert that we are in danger of taking a bit of the tail of the dog, which is a small part of an integrated and complex transport strategy, and blowing it up to try and add in things which are, to be quite frank, irrelevant to the questions that need to be asked.
Councillor Condi.
Just wanted to say that I think I support number 15. I support the intention that's there. Yes, the parking policy is about a limited supply of on-street parking and how we manage that. And there are different options for managing that, and one of them is to try and look at ways to reduce demand, and that is included in the parking policy. There is conversation in here about traffic demand management and other tools that we can do to reduce the demand for parking. So I'm quite comfortable with this, with number 15, and I'll be supporting it. I don't support number 16. I'm happy to work with the Deputy Mayor as the portfolio leader to incorporate some of these ideas into the consultation and engagement plan, but I'm not comfortable with including them as amendment. Just because of the vagueness of the wording and the last minute nature of the amendment, I'd be more comfortable to just take that offline and engage on that issue. So I won't be supporting 16. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
So I'd like to thank Councillor Free for raising these amendments. I'm strongly supportive. Thank you very much. This is absolutely climate change and equity in action. So thank you very much for doing that. I'll just take the second point first. Look, let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. This is easy. All we need to do is put on a few extra questions onto the consultation document. Please, I don't think we need to. We're not asking for a $100,000 study into what people think about it. This is quite simple. We're going to be, as we engage, we'll just be able to ask some questions. So let's just be calm about that one. I do think we need to be careful about politicising debate. I value officer advice, and I think it's important that we hear it. But nevertheless, the end of the day, we make the call. I have a long history and not accepting officer advice, and I feel like I have somewhat been vindicated recently. So I think we do need to be careful about venerating supposedly the advice of experts. Sometimes they do get it wrong. In terms of, including me, I'm sure I have. Now, in terms of number 15, thank you for that wording, actually, Councillor Free, because I am strongly in support, because my vision for the city is that we will have more trees. I'm going to go on and on about stormwater, this traineum. We need trees to deal with problems with our stormwater system, but we also need places in our streets for children to play. They should actually be safe. This might be quite radical, but they need to be safe to play in our streets, and they are not at the moment all of the time. And there's all sorts of other ways that we could use parking, for example, to support business vitality, more cafes. CBD, I'm always happy to take a car park out to put some seating in. I think that's fantastic. So there's lots of ways that we could use that space. So I am very happy. Of course, we also need more cycle parking, more mobility, micro-mobility parking. So I think it's a great amendment. Thanks for raising again.
Thank you, Councillor Panner. I would just like to caution you on the nature of your debate when you're speaking to officers, because they cannot defend themselves in meetings. So please just keep that in mind in the future. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I too just wanted to thank Councillor Free for bringing this amendment. Councillor Free, or Deputy Mayor Free, and Councillor Free as she was, has been a tireless champion for her residents in addressing their inability to use a public transport system that absolutely failed people in Strathmore and many Wellingtonians. And I see this amendment as about saying to people, yes, we have a duty to take you on. There is going to be reductions and limits to the parking available in Wellington. We know that's going to have an impact on your lives. It may be difficult for you to get to work. We want to know more about the other problems you're facing in your day-to-day life at the same time as we reduce parking. I think it's an absolutely appropriate and responsible question to ask Wellingtonians. And I would say that around this table it's actually very hard to get to impact on the nature of the decisions that the council makes. I've moved 3 amendments about the car parking policy over the time leading up to it, because we constantly got advice, that'll be in the parking policy, that'll be in the parking policy, that'll be in the parking policy. Well, it's here now, and we get to have our say, and we get to make a difference on it. So I'll get to those later. But I say it can actually be quite hard to have a say as a councillor and make sure that you can influence decisions on behalf of your residents. So I really welcome other councillors bringing amendments to the table that reflect what they're hearing in their communities. And I know that Councillor Free has heard the stories about people who've lost their jobs because they can't get to work, because they can't rely on the public transport system. So the message to them when we're reducing parking is we want to hear about how else we can help you in this circumstance. So I think it's very important and very appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
So I'd just like to say I fully support the comments from Councillor Calvert and Councillor Rush. I was horrified last night by all the amendments flying around, it was like being in a sort of blitzkrieg of everyone getting onto it. It makes life hell for the officers. It makes life hell for us too, because we're trying to make an intelligent, considered decision on things. But I just say what it did bring to mind was, I don't know if those of you who remember Therese Gatting when she was Chief Executive of Telecom in 2006, and she said she used confusion as the company's chief marketing tool. And I thought, this is confusion. This is absolute confusion. You know, the councillors are in danger of turning a focused policy document into something that's bigger than Ben-Hur. And I think we should just stick to the very simple, get on with what people in the city want us to do, which is to govern the city, get some results, and not have all these endless strategies, results, consultations, consultations, because otherwise we just become the laughingstock.
I'm going to speak now. I'd like to say I actually am going to support these amendments, and the reason being that I'm aware that when we've debated these, some of these specific situations, thinking of Thorndon Quay, one of the things that I became very aware of is that people often don't know how to change their behaviours. So they've figured out a solution, but they maybe don't know that it's the the best option for them. And in some ways we need to understand what those issues are. And actually when we talk about not over-consulting, we are doing a consultation, so why not ask that question now? And I do take the point that it is really possibly only adding a couple of questions onto a survey, which actually might be the bit that captures people, because it might be, actually, I need to be able to tell you why I struggle with getting into the city and why the concept of parking changing causes fear for me. And then we might actually find that there's some solutions that we can come up with that are different, that we haven't even thought of yet. So actually I can see how the impact of this, it doesn't have to be as massive as some people might be thinking. Mayor Foster.
Yeah, I guess the issue is it's all very well to add a couple of questions. The thing then is, what do you do with those questions? Now, I'm assuming that we are going to provide for people going to come in and talk to us. Yes, exactly. And if you start thinking about all the things that people might raise in that, it won't be a small conversation potentially. It could be a very large conversation. You know, I mean, I could start going, what would stop me? Oh, no, bus timetables, routes, pricing, cycle lanes not there. Could council invest more in, you know, walking to and from different places? So all of a sudden we start having something that is not about parking at all. The thing is, councillors, we've got other avenues to do that. I mean, Councillor Day, what you raised is, you know, and I think we were referring to the discussion we were having about Thorn and Quay, for example. We actually have a process to have a consultation about Thorn and Quay. So we're picking up these things in other places, and so we're going to essentially double up on the engagements that we're going to have, mostly through things related to the Let's Get Wellington Moving program. And I just wonder about the wisdom and the efficiency of doing that. I completely understand where you're coming from. I completely sympathise with the intent of it. But I just think in terms of the efficiency of us getting stuff done and the clarity of us getting stuff done, this isn't going to help it. So what becomes, if we do pass this, what becomes utterly critical, in fact, regardless what becomes utterly critical, but even more so if we do this, is what are the questions we ask? Because most people are going to look at the policy and go, oh my goodness me, that's really long. It's going to be really hard to get my head around. So what are the key questions that we ask? Now, if we ask anything that is too open-ended about this sort of stuff, we are going to get buried in submissions which are not necessarily particularly relevant to the policy. And so that becomes almost more important than what we write in the policy. So, yeah, I support the intent, but I just think we are in danger of getting ourselves up the wrong creek, possibly with far too many paddles.
Thank you, Councillor Wolfe.
Yeah, I won't be supporting either of these two amendments either. I believe that in 15 the language and the messaging isn't correct. I admire the sentiment, but saying reduce in order to reduce demand, it might not be what our constituents are looking for, and we're actually prejudging what may come back. It just lacks a bit of balance. I also agree with Councillor Calvert and other speakers as well. I think we should be thanking the officers for a bloody good paper. You know, we really should. Yeah. You know, Helen, you've done really, really well. You know, and we're taking it apart. And I just, as there are a few political points that are being put forth, I agree, Councillor Free. Public transport in the city is not what it should be. You know, it really isn't. But this isn't the paper to add that to. You know, like, and another little political point, our CBD is a 5-day retailing operation and it should be 7 days. And it's not for a number of reasons, and parking perhaps could just be one of those reasons. So maybe, just maybe, the feedback will come back that we do need more parking in the CBD or around Wellington, off street, on street, whatever. And the expectation is that from around that this table will be able to sort things out. And you know, like, I just think that, you know, there's just too much going on. And I agree with Councillor Young, absolutely. Last night was a nightmare. You know, we're getting last minute amendments at 11 and 12 o'clock at night, you know, and this morning. It's actually not fair and reasonable to be able to assess what's going on in that short amount of time.
Councillor Rush.
Yes, I mean, a question for officers. So is it realistic that we would... Sorry?
Your question really needs to be directed to the person that's moved the amendment. What's it?
Yeah, I'm asking officers' advice. Sorry.
Sorry, yes. Well, can you put your question, then we'll...
Sure. Just in terms of adding a couple of questions to the consultation, is that realistic, or will there need to be some sort of structure within the document that sets out the rationale for those questions and some pros and cons and a little bit more work than just what we're hearing?
Through the Chair, we would provide some context as to the reason behind those questions, but also the expectation of how that feedback would be considered and taken on board. So you'd wrap that all up together and you'd assess accordingly.
Okay, so that's the end of the speaking list. So what we'll do now is we will invite a right of reply from Councillor Free.
So look, I think actually it's probably people are making a bit more of a big deal out of this than is really intended. For those of you who think that we will not be taking out parking, you're really naive, I'm afraid, because we've been talking, let's get Welly moving, in this paper actually says it's setting out a plan to change how Wellingtons move within and access the city, and parking is integral to supporting how those plans are implemented. And we know that even from the preliminary work we're doing to lengthen bus stops, talking about bus lanes, there's going to be a whole lot less on-street parking. That's the reality. People are going to be very afraid of that and resistant. But nevertheless, my amendment doesn't actually say we're going to do this. It just says that in order to do this, we would be wanting to provide infrastructure that actually compensated. So better walking, better cycling and better public transport. I think personally it's a very innocuous amendment, but it does actually say that these things need to be considered. I think if it's anything, that's reassuring. The consultation process, look, I think someone said it's wasteful. I don't actually agree. The process is happening. Why not just include a few extra, couple of questions and get some information? And again, maybe even reduce the need for people to come and tell us this. People are going to tell us this stuff anyway. But I think providing a structured way in which they can tell us that we can then actually collate the information, because we've thought about it, we've thought about how they can give us this feedback, is just eminently sensible and will guide our future thinking around the transport strategy and other future work. We wait a long time to bring these things to the table. As somebody else said, it's often difficult to actually send a sense of what we're thinking. This sends a sense of what I'm thinking, and I guess I'm going to see how many other people think this. But, you know, I couldn't have actually sat here and not brought some amendment around these things. They're very top of mind for me with my portfolio areas. We actually need to do far better in alternative modes. They are still, in this paper, at the top of our transport hierarchy. They're still there. Walking first, cycling and micromobility second, and public transport third. And if we're not actually thinking and signalling to the public that we're thinking about those things and how we will actually respond to their concerns and needs, then I think we're failing. So, you know, if you don't support it, that's fine. I'm sure it'll all be, you know, we're just going to have to find out.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to put this amendment, both these amendments to the vote. Do we want them separately? Do people want to take them separately? Yes, you do. Okay. So we will begin with item Amendment 15. And we will take a division for both. So those for, press the green button. Against, press red. You can just press the other one. It does fix. Yeah. Or test. Contemplating. So that is carried. And we'll now vote on Amendment 16. So those for, press the green button. Against, press red. That is also carried. So thank you, councillors, for working your way through that. Sometimes these things that can be a bit bumpy, but we've perfectly finished in time for morning tea here. So we have 15 minutes for morning tea, and then we'll come back. Oh, actually, yes, sorry, I did. The Mayor just let me know that we've had some very sad news this morning that Des Britton has died. So we thought maybe it was just appropriate to acknowledge him with a moment of silence and just think about his contribution. We can talk about that over morning tea, but we'll just have a wee moment of silence. Yeah, we'll stand. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You can be seated and head to morning tea, so we'll come back. Thank you. No mai, haere mai. Welcome back. We're going to get underway. So councillors, if you'd like to come and take your turu, your seats. Turu. And we're sitting at a tepu, a table. Tepu. Turu is our seat that we're sitting on and tepu is our table. Our Māori lesson for the day. So we're going to start. Councillor Fitzsimons, would you like to introduce your amendment?
Yeah, kia ora anō. These amendments really follow on some of the questions that I asked on Tuesday, but also some amendments that I moved in the last triennium. And I guess I just want to explain just given some of the comments that were made earlier, that like all of you, I get residents come up to me and raise a whole range of different issues with me, and actually assume that we have a lot more ability to influence than I think we do in some situations. So what I try and do is file them away and find times to incorporate them where that can be usefully done. And this amendment has a number of things like that in it. And I would just like to outline that from B to F. All have officer support. But just in terms of the first one, when we declared a climate emergency, Councillor Brian Dawson and I moved an amendment that we must make sure that we have a just transition. And really what I'm grappling with and thinking a lot about, particularly this triennium, is how we make that just transition for low income and vulnerable people as practical as we can. So what does it actually mean in practice? How do we do that? And we're just learning, we're just trying to work through how the council can use its role to ensure a just transition for particularly vulnerable and low-income residents. So really what I'm suggesting in that A amendment is to take into account affordability for low-income residents and the principles for this parking policy. Now that doesn't mean that they will get a particular discount on a residence park or a coupon park or any kind of specific discount based on community services card or leisure card. But what it does mean is that when officers are setting up these area plans and when they're looking at how to approach the parking policy, the many other things they will take into account are also continue to be there, but also affordability for low-income residents as part of the just transition will also be included. In terms of B, one of the things that I have raised with me by residents is that they do want some ways to encourage carpooling of netball teams, cricket teams, rugby teams, that sort of thing to our council-owned facilities. And there is a lot of that goes on. But if we prioritised a car park for people that brought a bunch of children to a sporting activity, or adults even, then we might just see that would encourage that kind of behaviour. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just including it as another one of the bullet points there. And likewise, C, it's really just saying we've given a number of, we've given support to car share schemes like Mevo. This is really saying it doesn't just have to be the corporate sector that do car share. There may be community car share and community carpool arrangements that we want to support. I'm not sure that those exist in a very structured way now, but I saw the other day I had a residents association actually tell me about the Pet Collective, where people who own a pet can share that pet around when they're on holiday or get people to look after it, and it's all done by an app. So these are the sorts of things that, you could see. We can get you a dog, Councillor Young, temporarily, or an SUV. That is the point, is that you may be able to share an SUV with your street in Mount Victoria instead of everybody having an SUV in their street. It's really about saying that if there are community approaches to car share and carpool, that we'll support them. And then the paragraph D there is really to reflect an amendment that Councillor Lee and I put up last year, which is to particularly deal with parking issues in Newtown. The District Health Board there takes a lot of parks that would otherwise go to residents, and that's the perception of residents anyway, and I know that work is underway between officers and the DHB to look into that matter. And really, this is attempting to put some onus on those employers to manage parking demand and travel plans for their employees. Finally, on the E is really about the needs of schools and early childhood centres. So I think we've got quite a piecemeal approach in the way that we target parking, particularly outside schools. I know there are a few schools in my ward that are wanting parking 5 drop-off zones, even just for that 8:30 to 9 and 3 till 3:30 period. And I'd really like us to take a bit more of a proactive role in basically auditing all the schools and in early childhood centres around Wellington over time and making sure that we're responding to their parking needs. And finally, the last one is really about saying that as a public institution, the council will look where there are gaps in the delivery of parking from the private sector. So, for example, if there are shift workers who are coming from outside Wellington who can't access proper parking arrangements through private providers, that the council would say, well, there's a gap there, we'll look into it. So, and that might not be the example that plays out, but it's really about saying the private sector should do its thing. If there's a gap that we can usefully fill, that should be a principle that we look into.
Thank you. I'm seconding it, and I don't need to speak at this point, so I will. Councillor Pennant, you're on the speaking list next.
So thank you, Fitzsimons. I think there's some really good things in here, so I'm going to support some of them, but will oppose some of the others. Look, obviously I do support the principles around the just transition, but I'd like to thank officers for the excellent work that they did do on showing how a discount probably isn't that effective. So it's a bit like, as I said to the Mayor, about raising concerns around dog fees. So if you can't afford the dog fee, you probably can't afford the dog. And the same as if you're getting or an SUV, that might be good. If you can't afford to pay the parking charges, then can you afford to pay up to $12,000 a year to own a car? So I think there are other options to support people on low income, and I guess I just don't agree with going to the easy one. Let's make it cheaper to park. I think we have to remember that for the most part, most New Zealanders are better off than people in the third world who have real struggles. But I do support subsidising of good options. B, I think that's fine, but actually I think we could go further at some point. You're one of the portfolios leaders, Councillor Fitzsimons. We could actually use our grant funding and conditions to encourage people to carpool. I mean, we could actually make that stronger, but that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to support E. Look, if we are going to cut our emissions by 50% over the next 10 years, we have to get families moving in more sustainable ways. There are options. I've got a friend who has an electric bike, takes her 3 kids on. There are options for taking children, and I would like to thank Councillor Free again for her relentless advocacy on better public transport, because and we've been doing that advocacy for a long time. That's what needs to happen. You can parent without a car, and what it is up to society to make it easier for you to do that, rather than making it easier, from my perspective, to use a less sustainable mode. Look, if I'm kind of sympathetic to what you're saying there, but I'm not going to support it, because again, it could be used and it could be interpreted to mean, so if the private sector doesn't deliver for other groups who aren't disadvantaged, then we're going to fill them. And I don't believe in council owning car parking buildings or whatever. So I think there's a mix here, and I'm happy to support them. Thank you for bringing them to the table, whether I agree or not. I think it's always helpful to have the debate.
I'll just respond to a couple of the things. Oh no, she said no. I just want to respond to that comment about third world. Councillor Pennant, I think I maybe need to open your eyes that we do have people in New Zealand who do live.
Point of order, I said mostly, I didn't say all people. I acknowledge there are some people living in terrible conditions. Like third world. I did say
point
that.
Taken.
No.
But yes, we do have a lot of people living in conditions that would concern us, and maybe not necessarily in communities that that we hear or see about, because they don't actually get to participate in a lot of these processes. Also, to the comment about parenting without a car, unfortunately society isn't making it easier for people. I live near a lot of people who don't actually have the same choices at this point. They can't live in the city close to everything they need to do. As much as they would like to be able to do that, it is very complicated. Many people don't have jobs where they can just say, I'm going to be half an hour late because I'm going to decide to bike in after I've dropped the kids off to school. Actually, I do bike into the city and it takes me 45 minutes, and if I dropped the kids to school beforehand on a bike, that would have added another 20 minutes. It's a long time there and back each way. So the reality is we aren't actually at the point yet where for every suburb around the city we have got that sorted. And actually by having good plans for schools, we can do things like encourage parents to maybe drop their children a little bit further away from school so that they're leading their children towards being able to walk from home as they get older. But there is a period of time where children from between about 5 and 8 years old actually don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to do that on their own to the distance that they may need to do. So in some ways this is about a transition and helping people find a new way of doing things, and by talking to schools we can actually find out how we can do that. So a lot of schools actually would quite like to change the parking around schools because it is quite dangerous, but if we work with them we could look at drop-off zones which are a few blocks away and safe ways, walking a little walking bus from a drop-off zone where children can walk together. So I think it is really important that we don't just cut people off at their knees to the point where we just get everybody sort of balking at it and saying, I can't do that, it's too hard, and then we sort of end up splitting people into big groups that are opposed to each other. So I think I really commend you, Councillor Fitzsimons, for these amendments, and I do support all of them, and also Councillor Fitzsimons is going to speak to the last two in her right of reply, which were from Councillor Foon. Have we got anyone else? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. I'm not going to support these for pretty much the same reasons, and I'm trying to stick to my principles here on this. And there's a couple of aspects to this. And sticking to principles, can I just remind councillors, I find it quite interesting that we all passed that, or that last amendment went through about buses. And when I moved an amendment about increasing bus capacity under Let's Get Welly Moving last year, Councillor Freer voted against it. Let's make sure that we're being consistent with our principles here. Look, I just think, some of the stuff we're already doing. I know around parking around schools, I've actually been involved with some stuff working with our officers. Now, our officers are stretched. So you've got to realise that you're asking for auditing and you're asking for our officers to do more and more work. This is going to cost money. And then that might be fine, and setting the policy means that, but good policy setting is understanding about what costs are going to be involved, or even roughly. And so I think it's really important that we actually understand the impacts of this policy that we're going out to consult, that we're not actually agreeing on. And but I do support it, and a lot of comments that Councillor Day made, especially about not everyone has the luxury of living in the inner city and having the beach and the town belt on their doorstep and easy reach of shops. It's all very well being, telling us and people in outer suburbs how best to live. And can I just remind people that we make decisions and they never get implemented. Thorndon Quay, 2 years ago, we made a decision about helping parking for women who couldn't find a park, needed to drop their kids off, and to enable them to access parking on Thorndon Quay to get to work. We haven't implemented it. We have done nothing about Thorndon Quay. So you talk about, and that was also, it wasn't perfect for cycling, but it was going to help cycling. We made that decision in December 2017. Hasn't been implemented at all. So think about the things that we expect to see and what is realistic to achieve, because no one's following up on that. So.
Finished. Councillor Condé.
I just wanted to note I'm comfortable with all of these amendments. I may not completely agree with everything behind them, but this is a document that's just going out for consultation, and I think all of these points deserve to be discussed with the community. So I'm quite happy to support all of these, and I'd just like to thank Councillor Fitzsimons for working closely with myself and officers just to get the wording right to make it easier for everybody. So kia ora for that.
Being that there's no more speakers, would you like... Oh, Councillor Rush.
Sorry, I won't be supporting any of these amendments, mainly because, firstly, too much, too late. I just don't have time to give it the thought that I think it deserves. Talking about just transitions is it's interesting. It always seems to affect the low-income residents, but at the moment, the people being most affected by the enforced transition are people in Taranaki who are actually quite wealthy. So just going through some of the other aspects, we talk about the sports grounds. I mean, are you seriously telling me that that our community needs the council to tell them how they should organise themselves to sports grounds every weekend? Is this the level of interference that this council is going to have in the lives of our families? Huh? So when I was a kid, we carpooled because mums and dads couldn't do everything on the day, or else they would come and watch. I just don't think it's necessary. And as I mentioned, in terms of those who are a little bit older, we tend to carpool at the Wellington Axemen Rugby Club because of the drink driving policy. So I suggest perhaps if we want to encourage parents to carpool, perhaps providing free liquor at the sports grounds might be one way of doing it. Again, community car share. Why does the council need to encourage this? People will either do it or they won't. I would be horrified if someone would have to get into my car with the nappies and the baby stuff and the bottles and so forth. And then I have to put up with Led Zeppelin as well. Schools and early childhood centre, very near and dear to my heart because I travel to one of each every day. I assume the existing parking policy is adequate to accommodate representations to facilitate parking in those areas. If I got to a point with delivery of parking from the private sector, I'm a bit indifferent to that. But overall, in terms of the rest, I'm sorry, Councillor Fitzsimons, it's just too much and too late. With some areas that I am very concerned about the interference of the state in people's lives. People can make their own decisions. We've got a highly educated population here in Wellington. I think we let them get on with it.
Mayor Foster.
Yeah, I'm going to support some of them and not others. I take Councillor Rush's point about the level of, if you like, interference, but it's probably more the ability to manage some of these things. Because I think the reality is, if we start saying, when we put a policy in, or we want to do something, we should actually be able to actually carry it out. And if it's not, it makes us all look silly. To be honest, we're quite good. We're doing quite a good job of it at the moment. Possibly some people might argue, but there are some which I think are useful. Certainly, D I think is very useful. We should be working with major employers like that because they are significant traffic generators. In fact, we have on the books doing exactly that thing with the DHB. I'm not quite sure we've got to, but that's exactly the kind of thing I was envisaging will come out of the parking policy, where you've got these big institutional precincts, university, health board, airport, things like that. Where we can encourage a less car dependent way of getting around. Of course, if Newtown is one of the first places which is being looked at from an area scheme point of view, it makes absolute sense that we would engage with the DHB because they are clearly a large part of the DHB's employees are clearly a large part of the challenge. With respect to the needs of schools and early childcare centres, look, I'm reasonably okay with doing that. However, I would make the point that exactly what you said, Councillor Day, in terms of your argument that it's convenience, etc. This is the issue for everybody. When people choose the transport mode that they choose, they're generally choosing the one that they think is most convenient to themselves. It's not always the quickest, but it doesn't matter where someone is going. They're usually going to choose, because we are, thank heavens, a democracy and people exercise free choice, the method that they think works best for them. So we're trying to encourage more people to walk, to cycle, to use public transport. But that's true for schools and for early childcare centres too. They are, though, areas where you've got significant demand, usually in a very small location with vulnerable people over a very short period of time. So thinking cleverly about how we do that, and it's not just a parking thing, although some of it is, but it's also, that's where we do go to the sort of things that the Deputy Mayor was raising in the amendment before, which is, we start thinking about what's your journey to school like? How do we make the journey to school safer? Because a lot of parents, and I was definitely one of them, you'd feel really reluctant to let your precious little angels go and walk down an area where 999 times out of 100 they're going to be fine, but you don't want the other one out of 1,000. 99 out of 1,000. And And so I'm okay with that. And with F, I'm going to support that. I think that's consistent with what is in the paper. Because if there are gaps, private sector doesn't do it, then I don't think we should shy away from doing that. It's been a traditional role. In fact, there's probably one of these ironies here that some of the people who would say we shouldn't be involved in that role probably were the same people who said we shouldn't have sold parking buildings in the first place. So, and then the other one, G seems to make sense because we obviously want people to be doing things legally and safely. And you seem to doubled up on that one. Looks like the same one. Anyway, so if you can take some of those separately, I'd be appreciative.
Councillor O'Neill.
Just to briefly speak to a couple of these points as well, and hopefully canvass some new ones. So, whenever we talk about a low carbon city and a city that promotes public and active transport, the largest issue that I hear from constituents that I've seen in my own communities and communities that are less able than mine is that there isn't enough access for them. And I think that all of these amendments dictate out where we've missed people off before. Families don't always have options or have complex access needs, or there's issues of safety as well. And I think it does highlight, Andy and Sean answering your concerns as well. On the topic of convenience and access, we haven't really thought about vulnerable parents and disabled people before, and these amendments do bring that to the forefront. And it's certainly something that because we don't have these perspectives all the way through governance before, I think there is a risk that it can be left out. And to Councillor Calvert's point, we know that an amendment is not the end of all issues in a particular area, but it is a sign that we will be implementing and following through, and it is a sign of the intention behind things as well. So at least I would like to hold faith that these amendments are quite important. It does signal to other Wellingtonians that we are looking to consider these perspectives, particularly on the issues of when working with children and young people in early childhood education centres. They can become quite important as well, because these are potentially people that don't really have the time to come and sit at our table. And I'd like to, I'll be voting for all of these amendments, and also to remind councillors that most of the amendments have officer support too.
Right of reply, Councillor Fitzsimons.
Look, just very briefly, I want to pick up on the comments that Councillor Pennant made in terms of the analysis in the paper that discount might not be effective for low-income people. I think it's illogical and inconsistent for us to suggest that discounts for owners of e-vehicles might encourage their uptake when we know that it's not realistic for low-income people to own e-vehicles. So we're happy to give them a discount because we think it'll drive behavioural change, but the analysis and the logic doesn't apply to low-income people and making sure they have a just transition. And we had last year a very compelling public participant who came to us and said that the increase in residence parking was going to make her life much, much more difficult. I found her submission very compelling, and it's because of her submission that I want to make sure this is included, because I listened to her submission, I took account of what it meant to her life, and I'm trying to make a difference for her. Just in terms of the walking to school policy as well, there was talk about that we shouldn't be encouraging parking around schools because of that doesn't encourage active modes of transport. Actually, I think it's the contrary. If you have parking signs outside schools for 5 minutes, it means that those parks are available and that there's high turnover. Because what actually happens, and I've observed it when I drop my own children off, or they walk to school, what happens is that there's no parking and people end up doing U-turns onto the footpath and making walking and cycling much, much more dangerous. So actually parking 5 signs outside schools encourages active modes of transport to be safer. And just in terms of Councillor Rush, don't you worry, I don't want to hop in your car. Your car sounds a lot like my car. There's no suggestion that we're telling Wellingtonians how to live or what to do. What we're saying is in the development of our car parking policy, we can incentivise behaviours that make it easier for people to use our sports and recreation facilities. But that's a good thing. We want to make it easy. It's tight demand and it's very difficult sometimes to get parks. What we're saying is if you have 5 people in your car, there might be a spot for you very close to the sports field. We're making a whole lot of assessments around pregnant people. So we're saying that, they may need different access to parking. We're not going to police that. Just because we can't police it, or we think we can't, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it, in my view. And also, I just want to be clear in response to Councillor Calvert's comment around auditing around schools. That isn't in the amendment. I had originally thought about putting that in the amendment, but had taken some officer advice that perhaps it will happen under this parking policy, and David Chick gave assurances a couple of weeks ago that it would happen. So I guess, and I just finally wanted to thank Councillor Foon for the G&H, which she has included in around illegal parking and parking on footpaths, and making sure that that's on the agenda as well. And finally, I make no apologies for bringing amendments to papers. I've found over the journey of the time I've been on council, it's very difficult to know how you can affect change, and a decision around this table is very important and critical, and I will use my right to do it whenever I think I should.
You. What we're going to do now is, because I suspect there's going to be quite a few that we want to take separately, just for ease of trying to negotiate that, we're just going to take each one on its own, because I think I'm looking through the list. There might be two we could cluster together, but let's just do them separately. And I'm assuming that we want a division for each. Okay, so we'll start with A, and A is around the just transition. So those in favour of that, press 1. Those against, press 2. So that one has lost. It's not carried. So we will go on to Amendment B, and this is around encouraging sports groups and things to carpool and making it easier. So you know the drill with which way to vote. So that one is carried. Now we're up to C, which is around carpool arrangements, car share. So voting is open. And that is also carried. Oh, the next one. As after such. Okay, so on D, voting is open. They might be pleased with it. Okay, that's carried. Now we're up to E. So schools and early childhood centres. Voting is open. That one is also carried. Oh, that was quick. Thanks. So F. Voting is nearly open. I think officers are doing very well keeping up with this. This is quite a quick pace considering what we're doing. Thank you. So voting's open. And that one is carried. Up to G. G and H could go together actually, yeah. You just scroll it up a little bit. Voting is open.
Oh, sorry.
So you want to record it as being voted, as voting? Okay. Okay, so this is G and H, and this has carried as well. All right, so now we are up to Councillor Pannett, your amendments.
And look, I'd like to give a huge thanks to officers for this paper, because actually I think it is a big step in the right direction. It doesn't go as far as I'd like it, but nevertheless, I think it's fantastic to see that focus on walking and cycling and public transport. So well done for that. There was quite a lot of points made around we've got to listen to our constituents. Well, I look around this table and I see a lot of people who were elected on a sustainability agenda. So people put us there, and so that's why we move lots of amendments to that point. I have absolutely no objection to getting emails at 1:18 a.m. in the morning. That's fine. I just think it's good manners to try and indicate early on that you're going to raise an amendment, but people are busy, and I think councillors are paid well enough to look at their emails late at night or early in the morning, whatever suits you. So I'm absolutely fine with whoever. I've got two, yeah, and
all right,
three.
Order. We'll just keep going.
Right. So
Councillor Pannett to keep talking. Councillor Calvert.
So you know, I don't think any councillor should be castigated for when they bring their amendments. Okay, I don't care. Just as long as we could get it before 9:30 is just as helpful. Anyway. The passion for parking is one that has always slightly confused me. Not having a huge demand for it, but it does seem to be the one that causes the most division. And I will say that I do find it a bit frustrating, given the enormous social problems in this country and around our world. And it does tend to, in some cases, sound a bit first world. And I just rather that we try and keep an eye on the really big, complex problems. So most of you, except for Councillor Young, who were in the last triennium, supported the Climate and Ecological Emergency Declaration, what you essentially were voting for was about having a fundamental shift in the way that we live our lives, and about acknowledging the costs to residents and our animal friends of not taking action are devastating. So I do not resile from apologising for wanting people to maintain their property rights, to be able to afford insurance, to have somewhere to live, because this is what climate change is going to do to us. And I think, given the debate last week, which I also found a bit frustrating, the points around parking are actually are a sort of a form of a congestion charge. And the reason I support that is because the problem with private car use is that the benefits truly are privatised and the costs are socialised. And I think people need to pay for those costs. And that includes me. If I impose a cost on the environment, don't have any problem with paying for rubbish bags, then whatever. I have a commitment to doing that. When if I fly, then I will do that. In fact, I think I should pay more. Where people can do that. And there's this enormous focus on convenience. And actually, I think we need to look at the bigger picture. The costs are very, very, very significant. Over 300 people killed every year. Significant accidents, pollution, climate change, adverse amenity, impacts on vulnerable communities who don't drive. So I think that's just where some of my amendments will come. We don't have a lot of time to transition. We all agreed to cut our emissions by 50% over 10 years. That is huge. It's going to take a lot of work. And so this policy is a fantastic opportunity for doing some of that. So the argument around the transition is that we will reshape our suburbs so that it is easy for people to access goods and services and work. It's not just about, we're going to flick on a parking charge. It's actually saying, well, if it is difficult for you to get into the city, maybe there's other places where you need to work. And it also means probably reforming school sport, which is really, really problematic. Because other countries don't do school sport like us. There are other ways. Look, just a few points just before I quickly get into my amendments. I do have a bit of a philosophical and practical issue with the changes around inner city parking. Obviously, I'm one of the ward representatives there. The idea of introducing coupon parking was essentially to do some park and ride. And so I'm a bit on that because in a way that's better than people bringing their cars right into the CBD. So this shift, which I'm sure will have strong support amongst some of my constituents, I think it does have a few fish hooks. And I don't believe that people in the inner city need so much car parking. Really, you can exist, and we've seen some figures, you can exist without a car, and particularly if there is more rideshare, that really does fill in some important gaps. I'm just going to move these amendments. I'd like to thank Councillor Fitzsimons for giving me some advice on wording so that it's put in a more positive way. So that I did have some concerns around the amount of private parking that is provided, and so really. And given we don't have that many tools, the district plan review, but in our advocacy function, that we will work with business to encourage mode shift rather than providing so much parking. The 21st century is going to be about different transport modes. It's already happening. Now, I have listened to the concerns of my colleagues. I'm happy to work in a creative and collaborative process to try and think about other solutions, more creative solutions, about making it easy for families to travel around. We know that we need to go to all sorts of different places over the weekend, and I think there are some ways that we can do that. So certainly this amendment requests that officers come back with some further advice. So that might be things like your community Uber scheme, Councillor Fitzsimons, I think could be particularly good, or just the way we manage school sport, which these sort of flying all around the region is a little bit tricky. And I just wanted to, in the last amendment, note that. I'm just reminding people that we agreed to cut our emissions, and that this is one way of doing it. This is signalled in Tātakura through pricing mechanisms, but I have put appropriate engagement. We need to have a conversation, and just making sure that we are always on target. Councillor Day, I would like 43% and a sign above your head, just to remind us that that's what we aim to cut our emissions by over the next 10 years. Just on the wall, that we have to be very, very, very focused on our goal. If you want to reach a goal, you have to be focused, and we have got a good number there that we need to work towards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert.
I'll run a super sec what I'm going to say.
You need a seconder, sorry, Councillor Pennant.
Oh, you've already moved. But thank
so
you.
Councillor Paul is going to second. Would you like to speak now?
No, I think that covered everything.
Madam Chair,
Councillor
just
Calvert,
a point of order. Is there any chance that officials could print this off so that we could actually have a look at the full suite that Councillor Pennant's proposing, or was it just these
It's
two?
just this.
Just those two?
It's just this.
It's three.
We definitely do not need to print that.
This was complicated.
Okay, Councillor Calvert. Hey, sorry, I do have one question before we start. Is around the council strategy and the second part of your amendment. Which strategy are you referring to?
Oh, sorry. Sorry. That's a good pickup. Sorry, I just mean the parking policy. Sorry. Apologies. I should have. And in fact, actually, although it could be put with the transport strategy as well.
It could be.
Would you prefer it in the transport strategy?
That fits better.
All right. Yeah. All right. I won't have an argument with you.
That's much better.
Okay. All right. Good.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Calvert. Oh, there's one more question. Yes.
Thanks, Ian. Look, the meaning of the motion, in the first little I, what is it you're actually envisaging doing there? Because that could mean quite a lot, or mean absolutely nothing at all. So, but I don't really understand what it is that you're trying to say there.
Shall I just deal with that in my right of reply?
No, because,
okay.
We've got to speak to it. So,
so for example, so one idea of advocacy might be to encourage business owners to offer incentives to use, a sustainable mode, or help with the purchase of an electric bike, or something like that. I'm also just concerned around land use planning.
They're not in the district plan.
Mayor Foster and I will be working hard on this particular issue when we get to the district plan.
Foster, can I suggest you speak to this?
Okay.
Just wait. Have you finished clarifying that?
Yeah. So I think the district plan can be used as a tool to control how we use land and what we allocate land for.
Thank you. That's very helpful clarification. Councillor Calvert has been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
So, I'm not going to support these amendments. I like Councillor Pennant, I do have principles I do like to stick to. And this is what I thought when we saw all those amendments coming through last night, this was going to happen. I mean, I don't even know whether 1 and 2 are actually, in line with our standing orders. I mean, we're talking about district plan review, we're talking about transport strategy, and yet this is a document going out asking the public what they think about our parking policy and how we're going to manage it. So trying to use this to subvert and add something else in, I just think it's completely wrong. And Councillor Pannett, I don't know how long you've been here, 15 years, you should really know better. And look, as councillors, we do get elected by certain portions, supported by certain portions of our community, and that's fine. But once you're elected, you take an oath to do the best for the city. So remember that. You do take an oath. And so I think it's really important that we bear that in mind. And look, and I just find, I know last year or the last 2 years when we had issues with the buses, I recall it was myself, Councillor Free, Councillor Wolfe, we spoke up about it. I heard very little from Councillor Pennant to near the end.
Councillor Calvert, can you come back to what we're debating here? This is scooting around it.
This is about, we're talking about...
Try and focus your debate on these things so that you can keep us our attention.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So I just want to remind people about keeping to their principles on that as well. Councillor Pennant, you made a comment about, well, it's difficult getting to the city, you should look to work elsewhere. I think that is actually, I can't understand why you would say that. Our city survives on having a vibrant economic city centre, having and offering jobs and in all different walks of life and that. So to suggest people try and find a job elsewhere if they're difficulty getting into the city, I think is absolutely not the intention of this policy. And I think it's really important that we reduce our emissions. I, for one, pay now to get my green waste collected because our council has not done anything about green waste. And who was the council responsible for waste management?
Councillor Calvert,
Councillor Calvert, this is getting a bit offensive
I'll
actually at the moment.
But that's a bit offensive.
I think we need to keep our comments to let's not attack people. We deal with the issues, not the people. It's a really important. I think it's something that we've managed to do for a long time. We need to keep doing that. Mayor Foster.
Two things to say on this one. First one of them is that when you look at the headline bit there, we're agreeing to engage with public and stakeholder groups about the new parking policy. And then, which is what Councillor Calvert was saying, then we're attaching there things that we're being asked to agree to in policies that aren't actually in front of us at the moment, which to me seems out of order. The second one is that I'm sympathetic with the objective that Councillor Pannett's trying to get to in the little 2. But little 1, the examples that she gave in terms of the district plan, they're not district plan issues. So I'm really struggling to work out what it is that we would use the district plan to do, because our tools through the district plan are purely about land use management. So essentially the only tool that we've got, or the tool that is in the district plan at the moment, or tools that are in the district plan, are things like if you don't have to provide car parking for anything in the central city or in the suburban areas. We led the country by, it was interesting, sometimes people would say to me, oh, you should do this, this is really keen advocates. What you should do is you should make sure that people don't have to provide parking in the central city. And I said, yeah, we did that about 20 years ago. Oh, did you? Did you? We didn't realise. So we haven't required that for 25 plus years. 26 years now, that you don't have to provide parking in the central city. We also say that if you provide more than 70 car parks in the central city, we will require a transport assessment of the implications, most notably on the local network. So we're already putting some constraints in there. We're already seeing significant numbers of building owners and building developments where they are providing very little car parking, and these are commercial buildings as well as residential buildings. I think, for example, the Meridian building on the waterfront, I think, has 3 car parks, if it's even got that. So building owners are already doing this sort of thing. We're also, we ourselves are starting talking about, and we did it with our Tamara development, we decoupled the provision of housing from the provision of car parking. So the district plan review, the one place where we still do require parking, actually isn't in the business area, it's in the residential area. And that's one that obviously we are going to be thinking of. And actually, I think that's something in the parking policy we probably at least ought to intimate that we're doing. So I'm really struggling to work out, Councillor Pannett, what the tools are that you're thinking that we could put in through the district plan to encourage mode shift. And so I'd like you to answer that and write a reply. I mean, the things that I can think of that you might say is, in new buildings, we'd like you to make sure that you provide for bike parking, that you provide a shower facilities, those kind of things. I could see that. Yeah, they're pretty simple things, but that's probably about as far as I think we can go with that one. But I think if we're going to do those kind of things, let's specify a little bit rather than being so open-ended.
Thank you, Councillor Condie.
Thanks, Councillor Pannett, and I appreciate your laser focus on climate action. It always keeps us focused on the issues at hand. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be supporting these amendments today because I'm concerned that they are preempting work that is still to come. The district plan review is going to be happening, and I think we can raise all of those issues at that time. The council's transport strategy is happening. The Te Atakura First to Zero action plan is under development. I'm happy to raise those issues when these policies come in front of us, but I'm not so keen on passing amendments that preempt the advice that we're going to be seeing on those things. And I was happy to support Councillor Fitzsimon's amendments, even though they were numerous, because I think that they were making changes to the document that is going out for consultation. They were very focused on the matter at hand, and I feel like these are drifting a little bit further afield than I'd be comfortable with, so I won't be supporting them today.
Councillor Free.
Yeah, look, I sort of agree with what Councillor Condie has said. I understand completely the intent of these amendments, Councillor Pannett, and I am going to actually support the second one because I do think it's a very important principle that we at least have some advice. I know this is in the future, but again, my argument was that we get an opportunity around the table to actually sometimes signal. And that is a formal signal, even though it's in the future, it's there that we've thought this thing was important. I do agree it's important that we at least get some advice on mechanisms to support families with dependents in terms of the costs of moving to different options, or even using the bus options and other options that we currently have. So I will support number 2, even though I think it's a bit odd having it as a subheading of something else. But I understand your intent, and I want to support what you're saying in order to direct the officers to have a look at this in the future.
Councillor O'Neill.
I just had 2 questions. So the first question was whether or not the officers might be able to provide, in terms of whether this fits with the structure of the overall document, whether or not the officers support it. And then Laurie and I were just wondering where this fits in the 2 documents, like if you're able to be more specific about where you're placing the amendment. So
Councillor Pannett, do you want to do that in writing reply?
Could I do that?
Or do you want to do it now, maybe?
Yeah, because I'm just a bit uncomfortable with officers always coming into debate.
This is a political...
Yeah, it is political. So I'm happy to answer it at the end of it. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Wolfe.
Yeah, this is a consultation document, and I think that what these amendments do is preemptive. Like, we have that ability to come back and do this sort of stuff later once the submissions come in, if we need to. This is just too early, and it's while I have a certain amount of sympathy for it, I can't support this.
Thank you, Councillor Rush.
Well, it falls to me to say something supportive, I suppose, but unfortunately, I'm persuaded somewhat by Councillor Condie's, and I would also like to just draw Councillor Pannett's attention to the the focus that she quite rightly makes on families and dependents and those on low incomes, but in reality the mode shift and the most problems are going to be with the elderly. And we mustn't forget that our population is getting older, and they will not be able to cycle or to walk in the way that I understand people are now streaming from Miramar and the Hutt Valley. So as a consequence of that, I can't support the Roman numeral 2, and as a consequence of hearing from Councillor Condi, I won't support the others. But I love you.
Your microphone was still on. I wasn't expecting that to be part of the debate. There's no one else on the speaking list, so I now invite you to make a right of reply, Councillor Pennant.
Clarify. No, I'm just going to try and clarify some things. Councillor Calvert, to be honest, I did find your speech a little bit offensive. I haven't tried to subvert the process. Those amendments were circulated. It's about saying what tools we've got available to achieve a certain outcome, which I have been public about for over 20 years. Sorry, where were you 20 years ago when we were trying to foster a more sustainable transport system? So it was there, and so I don't accept that criticism. The taking an oath to do the best for the city, obviously we all have different ideas about how that's to be achieved, so I don't think that's a particularly helpful argument. I don't think it goes anywhere. The Greenways Trial, sorry, again, look, because you raised it, that was my initiative, which I got through. I'm proud of the fact that I led a process to make sure that we reduce our waste by over a third. Councillor Foon is now going to ably take over from me to actually start really implementing that. But yeah, waste-free Wellington. That wasn't actually the wording we came up with, Councillor, but and so that process will happen. I will remind you that I was the only councillor to oppose the expansion of the southern landfill. I was happy to pay the cost of putting our waste somewhere else until we sort our systems out. And I'm a single parent. Councillor, it's actually offensive. Yeah. That's actually really offensive.
Okay. Yeah, no,
stop it.
No, we need to stop with the personal comments, please. We need to allow people to speak without being interrupted.
And just Councillor Calvert, on your last point, I'm just saying that in terms of where people work, we can offer other options. Sometimes it will make more sense for people to work in the suburbs, and there is a business hub out in the northern suburbs. Oh well, okay, it's closed. Okay. But anyway, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try again. And in fact, from a resilience point of view, putting everything into the CBD doesn't make sense. So actually, if we're talking about travel demand, we do want some people working outside of the CBD. And obviously for some people that's not practical. Nurses need to be in a hospital. But there are some people that can. And where that is possible and feasible, I think we should be supporting them. Mayor Foster, look, you actually answered your own question. I'm not sure that the district plan can do as much as I would ideally like, but it can in terms of specifying how much space you provide for those alternative modes. It also can specify how much space we want for car parking. So actually that's quite fundamental. And my preference, obviously, which I've been very transparent about for many years, is that I prefer that we didn't. The second amendment is around all mechanisms, not just the district plan. So, I want to take a comprehensive look at everything that we can do. Anything is on the table. Now, Councillor Condi, it was actually officers who wanted me to change the wording to transport strategy. I was happy to, sorry, that was my fault for not drafting it very well, but it was, I would have put this in the parking policy, and in fact it should be as part of the parking policy. But I think, Councillor Free, you've been useful, thank you. Yeah, it's signalling that we are going to do this work, because parking is not an end of itself. You can't separate it out from why people need it. So this is just saying, look, we will do the work to support families to meet the concerns of some of the colleagues that have already been done. And we do constantly signal, and I'm proud to do that, because that's about being a leadership in a leadership role. Councillor O'Neill, look, I try to avoid writing amendments for the officers. Like, I don't actually generally, because otherwise, you might be rewriting the whole document, which would be a bit of a pain. So I think it will be up to them, if this amendment passes, to find the places where it's relevant to say, look, we can use a whole lot of tools to work with businesses to encourage mode shift. It's just part of our policy, and this is an agreement, essentially number 2, now that the officers have wanted the wording changed, that saying that this is what we will do. So we're agreeing that, and we do that, Councillor Calvert, we do that. We say we agree somewhere that we need to do some other work, and the last one, and officers agreed to this on Tuesday, I do want those targets in this parking policy because it absolutely is appropriate. Sorry, Councillor Rush, look, I am very happy to put ageing population in. If that's what it needs to get your support and your care for me, I will put ageing population. I've got absolutely no problems. I was just very focused on families because that was what was constantly being raised, and those on low incomes. If the committee is happy to accept that, happy to put. In saying that, I do know a number of very fit over 70-year-olds, so I don't think we want to say that old people can't do stuff. They can, and it's awesome. So if anyone doesn't have an objection, could we just put to support families, and actually, sorry, the reason I put dependents was that actually does include older people sometimes, but we can just put to support families. Yeah, to support. All right. Well, look, I had that focus, but given I do want to support everyone to move towards sustainable transport options, I'm also happy to change it to that, just to get that support.
What's the wording that you would like, just so that Cyrus can hear?
On further advice on mechanisms to support Wellingtonians to shift to more sustainable transport modes.
No, because then that doesn't acknowledge that it's harder for some to do that.
Yeah, okay, so
we need to leave that.
But can I just get your support to support older Wellingtonians in there? Yeah. Would that be acceptable?
Support families with dependents and older Wellingtonians, older people.
Yeah. Someone can weed stuff out. There you go. Just ask Sean. Yep. Okay, that's all. No, we're not. This is fine. Mayor Foster, you have done this so many times over your 27-year career.
Not Councillor Pannett, not usually in the middle of a right of reply speech, I haven't.
No, I'm just trying to
it sounds as though we're not going to be putting that change in. All right, let's just leave it as it is. People support it as it is.
I'm objecting.
Trying to be collegial. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so you've finished your right of reply now? Okay, so we're going to vote. We'll take them separately. So voting is open on 2AI. Take a division for this as well. Officers are doing an amazing job. So that's lost. And we'll now vote on 2A. 2A2. Voting is open if you haven't. That one is carried. Yep, and we'll now vote on 7A. So voting is open. Oh, it's not working. So that's carried as well.
Just before we move into the next piece of the debate, we do have some more amendments. I just want to really remind people about respectful politics. We talk about people not engaging with politics, and actually, from my perspective, this is the exact stuff that put me off standing in the first place and being interested, because I don't want to hear people picking on other people for various things that they do. I'd rather hear about people talking about the issues. So we all need to be really mindful of that, especially going into the next part of the debate. So I'm now going to ask Councillor Rush to bring his amendments. Have you got them ready? Is it, how many are there?
Yeah, no, just the one. Just the one. Yeah, no, Richard.
Thank you.
So, and this amendment really is just to more accurately describe where the transport strategy that's referred to in the document comes from. It actually comes from the Urban Growth Plan, Development and Transport Strategy 2015, rather than from First to Zero. It is included in First to Zero in an adapted manner, but in the context of Let's Get Wellington Moving, that refers to the Transport Strategy 2015. So if you look at the Urban Development and Transport Strategy 2015, it actually, it is a very fine document, even at 2 a.m, and it actually covers a huge amount. It really sets the framework for what we are doing today, both in the parking policy and in other aspects as well. So it was really simply to ensure that was consistently followed through with this parking policy. So it's also included in the 10-year plan. And indeed, development and review of the parking policy, which is what we're doing right now, is noted in the Transport Strategy 2015. So it was really just to make that connection.
Councillor Pennant. I need a seconder first, sorry. Are you seconding, Councillor Pennant?
No, I can't anyway.
No, you can't. Who can second? Who would like to second?
Well, it could be accepted. I just was going to ask why we were debating such a...
Accuracy? Accuracy?
At this point, we still don't have a seconder.
Is anyone okay?
Young, would you mind?
We could, with the leave of the meeting, we can just accept accept it as...
I heard Councillor Pennant seconding, actually. Did I hear?
She can't.
All right, leave of the meeting, let's go with it.
And so if the leave of the meeting's happy, then we will accept this.
But I was very late.
It was.
I was out at Strathmore last night till 10 a.m, yeah. Exactly, yeah. But it's one very small... It's okay for me.
Okay, so I think Mayor Foster has something to bring with the leave of the meeting, because nobody opposed that. So that's not with the leave of the meeting. Yeah. No, we need a seconder if it's... we can't debate it unless we have a seconder. So you'd have to second it, debate it.
Can I find a helpful way through this?
Simon,
given
yes.
that I've got an amendment which I'm about to move, how about I adopt that and put that on the end of my amendment?
Oh, Councillor Wolf's happy to second it. So now we are opening for debate. Councillor Calvert.
I'm not going to support this, and not only just because of the principle around it, but also that urban development transport strategy is pretty much out of date, and that's why we're doing the planning for growth. So to refer to something like that, and Councillor Rush may not be aware of it, it had a number of weaknesses, and that's why we are doing the planning for growth now. So referring to a document that I believe is outdated and not fit for this current environment going forward, because this policy is going to be in place for 10 years, I don't think it's appropriate to include it. And I think it's important to make these comments. We are debating, and if you think this is pretty tough debate, you should see Parliament. So, and when we're talking about, and I'm just, I think we just need to be...
I'm not actually going to say that that's the standard that we want to raise to.
Point of order.
Mayor Foster?
My point of order is that I'm not sure that talking about parliamentary debate and tough debate is particularly relevant to this amendment.
I completely agree. Councillor Condi would like to speak to the amendment.
I just wanted to address the question about why we're bringing a minor editorial change to an amendment. So I have taken some minor editorial changes on board, suggestions from people, but this one I felt, because we were talking about removing a reference to Te Atakura, I felt like some councillors might have a political opinion on that, and I thought it would be useful to bring it to the vote. I don't have a strong opinion either way about whether we include one or the other, so I'm waiting to hear the rest of the debate before I make up my mind.
Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, I was quite happy with this. And Councillor Calvert, I think the biggest flaw in the urban growth plan is that we simply underestimate the rate of growth. If we hadn't underestimated the rate of growth, we probably wouldn't be needing to do the planning for growth, because we'd actually have sufficient capacity, which we don't have, which is why we're doing the review. And I think all that Councillor Rush is trying to do here is to say that Te Atakura put in that hierarchy, but it took the hierarchy from the earlier document. So, you know, it's kind of like whoop-de-doo in a sense, but I think he's just trying to be accurate.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Rush's amendment. Ooh, surprise. But no, yeah, I think Councillor Rush's, the point of this amendment was to clarify the structure over again. It's just like a matter of procedure as well. No, that's all right.
Yeah, Councillor O'Neill, you may want to repeat that. Sorry, we were just checking on the welfare of our colleague.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, just kind of saying exactly what Andy was just said, so it's fine. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
I do actually need to talk, and I'm going to vote against it. Sorry. Thanks to my colleague for actually referring me back to the document. Look, first of all, to my BFF, I thought he was just being a bit finicky about this. I was like, oh, for goodness sake, it's 10 to 12. But look, actually, Councillor Paul has pointed out this removes reference to Te Atakura, and I just... Coming from my BFF, I am a bit nervous about removing references to Te Atakura. Look, I think this is being a little bit academic. What happens with council, just because you're a new councillor, Councillor Rush, through the chair, is that we do make constant references to other documents. There's nothing funny about that. So why wouldn't we talk about Te Atakura? So I'm sorry, I'm not going to vote for that. I have a very long-standing commitment to take serious action on climate change, so I'm not weakening it. But I still like it.
But it does say page 47 in the amendment, to make it clear that we know where we're talking about. Is there any more debate on this amendment? Right, so we're going to vote on this now.
Right of reply.
Well, you can have a right of reply.
Yeah,
sure. I've covered over my sign.
Yeah, appreciate that. So just to address Councillor Calvert, in reality it is the current transport strategy. There's nothing more that can be done until the new one has been adopted, and it is the current one. It actually lays out in quite some detail what the parking policy should look like and how it should evolve in quite a lot of detail, and that is actually reflected broadly in the document we have before us. And for that reason, it's inappropriate to refer to the first to zero document, because the context in which the hierarchy is used is in the context of Let's Get Wellington Moving, and again it refers to the transport strategy. So the accurate the accurate references to the transport strategy from 2015. Of course, once that's overtaken by something else, then we can adjust that. And that is the document that actually sets out all the detail of what the parking policy should say and do, and how it fits in, with other transport initiatives that includes cycling and Let's Get Wellington Moving and the other urban design and development. That's all I've got to say.
Okay, we'll now put this amendment to the vote. So voting is now open, then you know what to do. Oh, that's weird. So that one is lost. Right, we now have an amendment from Mayor Foster.
Right, so I'll speak to the substantive finally as well. Actually, I don't know that too many people have actually spoken to the substantive. This, councillors, this is a parking policy, I think, judging from the debate. But it's really great that we finally got here. This was something. So first of all, I want to say thank you to the officers for what's been some really comprehensive work on this. There is some really thorough information, a lot of work that's gone into this. There's obviously been some, engagement with a number of different parties beforehand. Jenny, I want to thank you too for your introduction and for the work that you've done with officers in this. So well done. This policy was put on the Forward program originally and it was going to be given to councillors in August of 2016. At that stage, I was looking after transport, and officers said, there's an election coming up in 2 months' time. This might be controversial. Can we just hold it over until after the election? I don't think they meant after the election of 2019. No, they wanted to do it, but all I'm saying is that this is something that should have happened a while ago. Now, if it had happened earlier, it might be that it wouldn't be quite as thorough a document, but it may well have been. But it certainly is something we should have done, and I'm delighted that we see this here. As Councillor Calvert said earlier, this really is about how we manage a limited resource. Fundamentally, that's what it's about. I'm going to be moving an amendment as part of this later on too, but I'll come to that, but I want to do the headline bit first. The thing is, as a number of people grow in the city, and that's where planning for growth is obviously, when you're engaging in both of them at the same time, it makes absolute sense. But bluntly, the more people we've got, A, the higher our carbon emissions are likely to be, and B, the greater the pressure is on all kinds of other resources, whether it's the atmosphere, whether it's our water supply, whether it's our land, whether it's our parking space. There is more pressure on all of those things. We are dealing here with the parking space bit of that. And Councillor Pannett talked about shifting the modes that people travel in. We've been doing that for my entire time on council. So 1992, funnily enough, was the nadir of public transport use. And for a whole range of reasons, since then, public transport use, walking and cycling, and have all gone up proportionately. They have gained mode share every single year. Sometimes it's been public transport that's been making the gains, sometimes it's been walking, sometimes it's been cycling, sometimes it's been all three. But we should always recognise that actually we've done some pretty good stuff so far. A lot of it's low key, it's a lot of small things, but we have done that and we've made a difference. And that is why our carbon emissions per capita, well, one of the reasons our carbon emissions per capita are the lowest in the country, or the lowest in Australasia. One of the other reasons is we've got no manufacturing and no agriculture either, but hey, but we do have an airport, yeah, but I'm not sure that's counted in there. The most significant transport initiative that we can make is actually the way we design our city. So that's why it's really important that we're doing this alongside of planning for growth. Because if you design your city in a way which is spread all over the place, people are not going to be able to walk or use their bikes, or not many of them are, or get on public transport. They are going to get in a car. And so sometimes what frustrates me is that we have a very myopic approach to transport, and I am really focused on, I hate a particular project. It is going to be the end of the world that project is delivered, but I'm going to completely ignore every other project which is delivering huge numbers of vehicles or is developing huge numbers of properties in areas which are going to be vehicle dependent up the line. So I think you can probably work out that I'm talking about roads that are being delivered outside of Wellington City, but deliver people into Wellington City, or suburban developments which are outside of Wellington City and are delivering large numbers of people into Wellington City. They're going to have a lot more impact on our carbon emissions and on on the way people get here and get into our city than anything that we do probably within the city. Anyway, parking. So I've got some amendments which I'm going to get to there. I guess my key thing here is that I would like people to be able to say pretty much anything and everything that they want to say about parking, but about parking. So we should be, in what we put out there, we should be asking questions and having a document that people can essentially tell us anything they want to, because this is their time to do that. And I would encourage people to get involved. It's going to be probably a difficult document for many people to get around there. So the questions we ask of people are going to be really, really important. So some of those things, we pretty much don't refer to weekend parking at all here. There's very little in that, but it is encapsulated in the kind of questions that we ask. So when we initiated charging, or reinitiated charging for weekend parking a couple of years ago, there was no analysis. Well, there was analysis done, but we kind of didn't actually follow the principles which are in this document. So the key principles which are in this document are about demand. If you've got a high level of demand for parking at any stage, then we start charging. If you've got a low level of demand for parking at any stage or any location, you don't. And if you look at the occupancy levels which we had in front of us at the time, some of those areas didn't stack up in terms of the policy which we've got in front of us. So I'm going to encourage people to have a say on that and say whether there are some times in some places where maybe we are charging at the moment where we shouldn't be. Because bluntly, when we removed free weekend parking, the key driver was revenue. That was pretty nakedly so. So I would be encouraging people to have a say on, how weekend parking fits into this. Off-street parking. What's quite good in here is that it's kind of one of the last levels of doing things, but there are going to be circumstances where, to achieve some of our transport objectives, whether it's cycle lanes or bus lanes, we are going to need to take parking off streets, and sometimes the right solution will be to replace that with take parking on street, take it away. And sometimes the right solution is going to be able to put parking somewhere else. So if you think, for example, take the Southern Connections for cycleways, if the solution is to put a cycleway down Adelaide Road, those narrow bits of Adelaide Road through Berrimport, etc., it's going to be pretty darn hard to find existing places on street which are already there for people who often cannot provide parking off street because of the nature of their housing, to find another place to park. So do we start thinking about that off street? And I think there's a role there. There's also, I think, a role in the central city as well to support our business community. And I'm pleased that the document actually refers to that. And again, I would encourage people to have a say on that. One of the things, two of the weaknesses in the document, I'll come to those shortly, the district plan isn't particularly heavily referenced, and I think we probably at least ought to say somewhere in the document, actually, we will be going through a review of the district plan. We will be going through a review of the district plan, and parking will be a component in that. And other couple of things to say before I get to the amendment. There are going to be significant revenue impacts on this. If we start taking it, if you look at Let's Get Wellington Moving, says the documentation says about 1,400 to 1,500 car parks being affected. By affected, I'm assuming means removed. Our average car park used to earn us about $6,000 a year. I think it is now higher than that. So do the maths and you are at something like $9 million plus of revenue that we will no longer have. That's a really significant impact for the city. I'm told it's built into, I've got to get my head around how it's built into the Let's Get Wellington Moving numbers, but that is a huge impact on our budgetary situation. Another area I think we need to think about very, very carefully, Councillor Pannett, when she was speaking, said that people could find jobs elsewhere. Now, our
point of order. Look, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit tired of misrepresentation in debate. I did not say that. So could you just?
I wrote it down too.
Can you please just moderate your comments? I would appreciate that.
I'm not attacking
you did actually make that comment, but let's move on.
Councillor, well, unless it's offensive, which I've. You said it. Well, Councillor Pannett, you said exactly those words, so I wrote them down.
Okay, let's just keep moving.
And you were talking about Johnsonville hubs and things like that, so, I think I took the tenor of what you said. One of the things we've got to remember, councillors, is we have the best central city in the country, bar none, and we want to make sure it stays that way. We want to look after the health of our city. So I was really, really delighted that we included two things in the principles that are in there. One of them, thank you, Councillor Matthews, was about accessibility for all, really important. The second one of them is about the well-being of our business community. I do not want us to damage that well-being because there are enough challenges for it already. And what we do not want to do in doing any of these things is to drive particularly retail and hospitality and entertainment out of the city, because one of the things people will do is they will go to other cities to do that, or they will go online, which is even worse. And we undermine what is great about our city. So we've got to be really, really careful about those things. The final thing before I get to the amendment is in terms of the one of the things we're going to have to think about here, as our prices tend to rise, and I really like the concept here of a graduated price. It's something I've been keen on for quite a while. So you're there for a few minutes, it's relatively cheap, you come in, you do your business, you get out. That's really good. You're there for a longer period, you start paying more. But one of the things we've got to be careful of is as you start paying more, government sets the infringement fee levels. It's put a ceiling on them. get reviewed once in a blue moon because the government doesn't like doing that because it's seen as revenue raising or whatever. But ultimately we get to the situation where our parking charges are high enough and the infringements are low enough and people will not pay. They will just go, I'll take the risk. And so we've probably got to do some advocacy to government to say, look, you want us to get people using different forms of transport. You're actually going to have to take some leadership and help us with some of these things. Not just in Wellington. Auckland's going to face exactly the same thing too. So finally to the two amendments. The first one of those, I think we had a bit of conversation about this before. I'm not sure the word was minute. It was. It's a typo there. Private.
It's Councillor.
Private.
Sorry, it's Mayor Foster's writing, obviously.
It's private. Okay, I'll read it out. It's agreed that the policy and questions include asking whether council should consider charging for private hire operations using on streets. The top one, sorry. Here. Private hire operations using on-street space, noting demand for space often exceeds supply, and those spaces are not available for other uses. Now, so what does that mean? It means at the moment we have this conversation about taxis in particular. At the moment we have some taxi operators who use technology and they don't use car parking spaces. We have other taxi operators who use car parking spaces. Those spaces are valuable. They could be used by other for other uses in light of our hierarchy. And it's just saying that we ask the question. It's not saying what the answer is going to be, but it's saying we ask the question about whether we should be charging for those. The other one, and that's why it doesn't just say taxis, is we're obviously going to be getting some feedback on e-scooters. And one of the things that we know that people don't like about e-scooters is they get scattered all over the footpaths. Logical approach might well be to say, well, let's put them on in a street space in corrals. If we do that sort of thing, of course, then you might say, well, actually, we're taking out a valuable space from something else. Maybe we do want to charge because that is a cost of doing it. So again, it's just asking the question. It's not telling you what the answer is going to be. But if we don't ask the question, and it's virtually invisible in here, we won't get any feedback on it. So let's ask the question, in my view. And then 18 is ask that the policy note that the council will engage with private sector parking providers during the engagement process. Double engagement, to encourage their parking management to support the objectives and principles of this draft policy. So we know that the majority of car parking spaces in the central city aren't under our control. The policy is almost silent on that. But we also know that the vast majority of those parking spaces, they're either private and not available to the public, or they are available to the public, their tariff structure favours long stay parking, i.e. commuter parking. And if you look at our hierarchy, that's the wrong way round. And we have tried in the past to say we'd actually really like it if your tariff structure supported business and supported retail, and your short stay parking was actually a bit cheaper and your long stay parking was more expensive. But at the moment there's no incentive for them to do that. Now it's possible that through the funding tools related to Let's Get Wellington Moving, we might get some tools to be able to encourage that. But at least we should be talking to the private sector providers to say, hey, can you do some things which actually support this policy rather than actually effectively at the moment they're undermining it? Because the cheapest form of parking is long stay parking in their buildings, and it used to be it would cost you more to be there for 3 hours than it would be for the whole day. That's nuts, and that's not helpful. So those are the two amendments, and Councillor Young is seconding them. Thank you.
And Councillor Deputy Mayor Free, you're up to speak. Oh, sorry, you would like to speak, Councillor Young. Sorry.
No, I think there's been so much speaking this morning. I'm just almost past it, but I'm very happy to second it.
If you don't actually need to speak when you're seconding it, just give me an indication, because that takes like 30 seconds and the day's ticking on. Deputy Mayor Free.
Just to the whole thing, when it's finally there.
Okay. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I sort of got a bit confused, Mayor Foster, with these amendments, because you started talking about weekend parking as if these amendments were going to be getting rid of weekend parking or even reviewing it, but they're actually not even about weekend parking. So I just... Yeah, so okay, I get it. So obviously the right place if you do want to carry through with your election promise on weekend parking is the annual plan, not this parking policy. Yeah, right. Okay, so I also was interested in your comments about the Southern Connection cycleway because as a ward councillor, I've been asking for some time for an update on the Southern Connection cycleway, and you seem to make some comments which indicated a bit more knowledge, and I'd really appreciate that if there is more to know about that cycleway, which the community has been told to expect, and the consultation has been run about the Berempore Town upgrade. You know, I'm really worried. Okay, well, we need to, including you, all of us need to know more about that because I've sort of heard on the grapevine that it's delayed, and that's been the implication, and there's been some communication with the Berempore community about that town centre upgrade that we extensively consulted on, that it might not be happening or might be delayed, and I know there's already been some public debate on that, so very keen to get an update on that. And just in terms of your comments talking about the wellbeing of the business community and the risk that people might go online, actually my personal experience, which I've discussed with some retailers, is that the fact that you can go and shop in the weekends has put me off buying online. And the example is my Rains jacket, which I bought from Area 51. And I didn't buy it online because I thought I can nip to the shop, buy that, and I know I'll be guaranteed a park at the weekend. And that's exactly what happened. And I've talked to the retailer at Area 51 and noted that. So I don't think there is a consistent view in the business community that weekend parking has been a bad thing, charging for weekend parking has been a bad thing. And in fact, in that example, it encouraged me to go from online to in person and try it on. In terms of the question, the comments in private hire operations, which I now understand more because I couldn't really understand that before, is I would be quite interested, like when Councillor Free put forward her amendment, there was a whole lot of questions about whether we're really opening this all up and it's a whole new thing. I'd be interested in some officer advice in the same way she got it, around whether taxis, Uber, whoever else you're talking about, how difficult it is or how manageable it is to consult on that, so whether that kind of is consistent with the broad approach in the same way we got the advice on Councillor Freeze, because I will be influenced by that.
Could we have some officer advice on that, please?
Through the chair, the officer advice is the same. I conveyed the same principles to the mayor in terms of that amendment. No, in terms of the principles and the content of it. But in terms of what it means to the actual engagement with the community, that same principle will be asked of you, and that's exactly what's happened.
Thank you. Councillor.
Sorry, I can't actually remember what your advice was. You could contain it, or you could do a full-blown consultation. You'll need to decide that. And so, is this? This feels like it's harder to contain because I don't know how I personally don't know the legal mechanism by which we would charge taxi operators and whether we'd also include Uber and how that would work and whether that would need to be worked through before we start asking the community. So I guess I'm interested in that. It's a bit different from, but maybe they should.
So through the chair, if you're referring specifically to 18 as it currently stands, okay, so 17. Then similar to Deputy Mayor Free's questions as well that are being sought, we would have to provide a front end and a containment to what we're actually seeking through that question, so that both the expectation and the way we analyse that and feed that back through the finalisation of the policy would be put to council.
Thank you. I'm going to keep us moving quite quickly now because we've got some lunch provided for 12:30 and then we'll need to have a break for lunch and then come back, but we do have a briefing at 1:30, so time is ticking on. So Councillor Condi.
Thank you. We've had a bit of conversation about amendments flying around last night, and as the portfolio holder, I have to say, that would have been incredibly difficult to manage if you were just the councillor, but as a portfolio holder, I at least knew that all those amendments were coming and I was able to manage that process. And I would note that this is the first time I've seen these amendments, and just the fact that, in fact, we had a typo that meant we couldn't understand what was going on when you were explaining to us, it suggests that that's an issue with how these amendments have been brought forward. In terms of the substantive, I think that I agree with what you're trying to do in both of these. Again, the intent is fine and interesting. I have concerns about how that's going to impact on the consultation as we go forward and the impact on that on officers on short notice. I'm still on the fence about which way I'm going to vote on these.
Councillor Pennant.
So, consistent with other amendments, I'm not going to be mean-spirited. I don't really care when it arrives. It would be better if it was earlier, but I think this is fine. I think, again, it's a couple of questions around the charging regime, so I actually thank the Mayor for bringing that. These people are making money, so I think it's fair enough to ask whether they should charge. Mayor Foster, but it would be good to coordinate with me, because we could have sorted out that amendment, because hopefully this one will go through when the other one didn't. And I'd just like to make the final point, Mayor Foster. I do celebrate the enormous improvements that have been made in the transport space over the last 25 years. I think it's fantastic, and we should always celebrate anything that we can get through, because change is hard. But as one of your antagonists over that same period, I do possibly disagree with this idea that, at times we were just opposing one project. We had a different vision for the city, and fortunately that vision is now being adopted more widely. And so I think, really basically, this policy is about our philosophy around the way we think a city should move. We can talk about all the amendments, but that's fundamentally what it's about. And so I look forward to seeing over the next 10 years some very significant transformation in the way we plan our city, with your full support and leadership. Kia ora.
Thank you. Very succinct. Councillor Rush.
I'll try and be succinct.
That would be appreciated.
Although I will start with the Shakespearean theme that to be or not to be, and to omit or not to omit. So the Mayor mentioned earlier that we shouldn't make policies that make us look silly. The challenge that we've set ourselves is enormous, and I'm just going to recite a few policies that our previous councils have put together. Our strategy, Our Future 1997, transport fossil fuel use within Wellington City is 10% below 1990 levels by year 2005, 60% below those levels by year 2020. Climate Change Action Plan 2013. By 2020, the city aims for a 30% reduction from 2001 levels.
Okay.
Wellington Urban...
We kind of get the point. Can you go on to the next bit now?
Wellington Urban Growth Plan, same. First to zero, reduce emissions by 10% by 2020,
Councillor
43%
Rush,
over...
I ask you to make your point
When are
now.
we going to get real about this and stop it being a talk fest?
That's what we're trying to do today. You're on our page. Thank you.
Look, in my view, transport emissions will be resolved by one of three ways. We ban motor vehicles.
This needs to be on the amendment, Councillor Rush. When we're debating, we have to make sure we're debating.
Well, I was addressing the Mayor's references to carbon emissions. That was...
All right, we're going to keep
topical.
moving now.
Okay.
Mayor Foster, would you like a very quick right of reply?
Yeah, very quickly. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
And maybe the Mayor could do this right of reply, but number 18, to support the objective and principles of this draft policy. I think what we've heard today around the table, there's a lot of debate about what the principles are, and I would like to understand what we're talking about there. As per the purpose of the document, it's written down.
Thank you, Mayor Foster.
So let's start with that one, and thank you for your comments there. So I'm only going to reply to the things, because some of the bits, because I was speaking both the substantive and to the amendments, so really it's only the amendments I need to respond to. The objectives, if you take an example, page 53, sets out the objectives: support shift in the types of transport use, support safe movement, support business wellbeing, support city amenity and safety, support access for all, support move to becoming an eco-city to support service excellence and safe working environment. And then the principles are immediately below those, and they are slightly longer, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it goes down to F, G, H. So they are there. They are there in black and white in the document. So that is all I'm asking, that we support those. Got them, Councillor? Cool. So that's what I mean. And I've used the word objective. It should be objectives, but objectives and principles, because they are the terms that are used in the document. In terms of what people had to say, I know no more than you do about the Southern Connection at this stage, Councillor Fitzsimons, and I'm looking forward to the point that I was trying to make there is that, but that's about substantive, so I'll leave that aside. Yep. In terms, I think where you got to is you leapt to how you might implement it rather than the principle. I mean, there's quite a few things which here there are things about how you implement things as opposed to the principle. The first principle, though, is do we ask the question about whether we should charge commercial operators for operating their businesses on the street and taking space away from other uses. And if you note in the hierarchy, quite often those businesses are actually lower down. That business operations actually lower down the hierarchy than some of the other things that we choose. So therefore, it will make sense to ration it in some way. And as I said, I note that some for taxis, some taxi operators don't use these things. Some do. But the other thing is it might actually help tidy a few things up as well. Because your arrangement may well be, now I'm leaping to a solution, but your arrangement is probably quite likely to be with the company as opposed to the individual vehicle occupying a space for any given period in time, which is the way that, for example, an airport or a hospital or a supermarket, for example, would do exactly the same thing. That we have a contractual arrangement with them. And I'd also note that Uber at the moment, because I have had some limited feedback from Uber, is that they can't use these spaces. At the moment, they're not allowed to. So really all that was about was a leap to how it worked. So all I'm asking councillors, I think, because the 17, I apologise again, particularly Councillor Condi, that this came late. That's a reflection of slightly busy schedule over the last couple of days. And I'd have liked to get it to you earlier. The first one of them, I know, and Councillor Fitzsimons, you'd raised it as well, that there was some willingness to have a conversation. It makes most sense to have the conversation now because it is a parking issue. And as I said, 18 is we just want the private sector, which provides most of the parking, to be operating in a way which supports our policy rather than undermines it. So it's just saying, let's have a conversation with them.
Okay, we're going to vote on these now. Do we want to take them separately or do we want to do them together? Together? Yep. Together, and do we need a division? Nope. Nope. Okay. Voting is open. That's carried. So we're back to the substantive now, and I just want us to think about whether we really need to speak to this because it's nearly 12:30. We still actually have another paper after this, after lunch, which could take a few minutes. Yep, so we're just going to take a moment to read the whole thing, unless anyone has a burning desire that they've got something new to add. I don't want to cut people off, but I think we've probably debated it fairly well now. And think about if there's anything you want taken separately. Okay, well, can you think about which ones they are? Would you like to speak? Okay, you can do that while people are working out which ones they want to take separately.
So look, I have been part of the early discussions around why we needed this parking policy, and I completely concur with the Mayor. It's been an awful long time coming. What I actually wanted to do was acknowledge both the staff but also Councillor Kelvie Freeman, who held this portfolio of the whole last triennium and actually did quite a lot to progress this work, who's no longer with us to actually get here at this day. Underpinning this is really a big desire to improve those other modes, and that's all I want to say. You can't get away from the fact that we're trying to swap one thing for another thing, even if it's only in a small shift. Hopefully it's over time a bigger shift. But this is a very strategic document to achieving a lot of things we want to achieve about the livability of our city and the move to active modes in public transport.
Thank you, and I've been reminded there is the right of reply, which I will let Councillor Condi take.
Which I will be very brief. I just wanted to thank everyone for the lively discussion and the fact that there's obviously been lots of engagement with the document, which is great. I think just to bring the conversation back around to what we're actually voting about is the objectives of the document. Councillor Calvert, that this is really about how we manage our parking supply. And what priorities we're going to have for that. But it occurs in the context of a reduction in supply. We know that we've had a reduction in on-street supply and we will continue to have a reduction in on-street supply due to other programs that the council is pursuing, such as Let's Get Wellington Moving. So it does happen within that context. It sets out our priorities. So we've got this great hierarchy that says, mobility parks are going to be given a higher priority than loading zones, which are going to be given a higher, and short stay parking is given a higher priority than long-term parking. That's the level of the document that I think most of the people are going to be engaging with when this goes out for consultation, which is great. And the other big section that's in there for people to engage with is really around what are the tools that we have at our disposal for when demand does exceed supply. So when we're in a situation where you can't find a park and people are parking on the footpath, or people are engaging in not great behaviours around parking, when there's too much demand for supply, then what do we do? And that's where a lot of the engagement we're going to have from our community is going to come from, because the tools that we have at our disposal then are things like introducing time limits, bringing in charging, looking at a residence parking scheme, looking at our coupon parking schemes. The Mayor has mentioned charging at the weekends. I'm sure we're going to have lots of conversations from people about on-street park and ride in the suburbs. There's something in here about motorcycle parking, about accessible parking, about providing short-stay parking outside the dairy or the shop or the school. So there's a lot of things for our community to really engage with at a concrete level, even though most of our debate has been, really at the kind of the principles level of what's going on. So I just wanted to highlight all of those things again and thank everyone for their engagement.
Thank you very much. Have people worked out which ones they would like to have taken separately?
Can I just make an observation? Because we're now voting on the thing as a totality. There might be bits that I don't like, but we've already effectively recorded our vote against bits. So just as a matter of principle, it's actually quite good if we actually go. Look, now we've done the debate, we've done the vote. You've shown
The
me you're
vote
going to
is
vote.
because we've done division.
block.
It's quite clear where you've voted along the way.
Could I just make a note?
Yeah.
If there's anything in the
Oh yeah.
I'll turn my microphone on so you can all hear me.
People should have.
The original recommendations, there were 1 through 10. If anybody wants to take those separately, then I think that would
appropriate.
be appropriate.
That would be more appropriate.
But I think any of the amendments that we've already voted on, I concur.
It has been recorded by division, so I think we've got a clear steer there of where people's preferences were, but we do need to be efficient. It is very clear if you look at our minutes, you'll see it. So did anyone want anything separate from...
You've already voted the way... You've shown your vote.
What's that?
Unless you're really insistent.
I just think we do here. It's very clear politically where you've done. We can take it separately if you want, Councillor Calvert. We're trying to agree to it. If you don't agree, then we are agreeing that we will follow the process if that's not going to work for you. So,
Madam Chair, was there an opportunity for debate in regards to the overall document? Have I just missed that?
I said it at the end quite clearly. And Councillor Free spoke, and then Councillor Condi has done a right of reply, so we're not going to open up now. It's too late now. So, Councillor Calvert, do you want us to take anything separately?
Number 2. Through the chair, so 2 has been amended, 2 has been replaced by Councillor Pennett's amendment, and 7 has been replaced by Councillor Pennett's amendment, and then the rest of the amendments are 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. I can scroll down. 11, Councillor Matthews' amendment, 12 and 13, Councillor Deputy Mayor Free's amendment, 14, Councillor Fitzsimon's amendment, 15 and 16, Mayor Foster's amendment. That's it.
Your votes have been recorded on all of them, so...
I'm going to do it for the...
Yep, thank you. Yep. Well, and the standing orders review won't necessarily change some of that, but I think the point is that we have to decide how we want these meetings to operate, and this is probably not the best time to have this conversation. So in the interest of time, then it sounds like you're agreeing that we'll do that today. Okay. Right, so voting will be open. We're voting on the whole thing. It's now open. And that is carried. I would just like to now thank the officers. You've been very patient through the whole process. Thank you for the meetings that you've had with us. Thank you, and thank you, Helen, for the time you've spent with councillors, getting them to understand the policy and for sitting through quite a full-on debate today. It is a bit of a harrowing process. I know when you've worked on something really hard and listening to all the debate can be quite full-on. So thank you, and thank you to the other officers who have supported you as well. We really appreciate it. Right, so we're going to break for lunch now, and we're going to come back in 20 minutes. Lunch is provided. So if you want to bring something back with you and you haven't finished in 20 minutes, that's fine. But we're just going to try and keep moving.
So we're pressing refresh now. We've got a new paper, new debate, new attitude. So we're going to go on to item 2.1, which is a submission on the Urban Development Bill, and I'm going to ask Mayor Foster to introduce the report. Have we still got a... Yes, we have. Thank you. We need everyone ready to stay at the table now, just so that we keep our quorum. Yes, and I did tell them how long, so they will be. Yep, let's plough in.
Okay. Actually, I'll be tempted to say I move, and then we can just put it and get it on. No, but seriously, this is a really important piece of legislation. So first of all, can I just say thank you to all the staff, Erica, Baz in particular, for the hard work you've put into putting this together. Really important piece of legislation. The government has made it very, very clear that it wants more housing. I suspect in part that's a reaction to the success of the Kiwi Bill program, but they're really, really keen to provide more housing. The problem is that the legislation as it stands, or the draft legislation as it stands, has some massive flaws in it. And I'm going to point some of those out now, and I think the officers have picked those up from the conversations we've had before. I know as the bill was being developed, and then we had as Metro Mayors, we had a briefing from Housing and Urban Development. I've had meetings with the Minister, and also with the Chief Executive, Kāinga Ora. And every one of them said that we want to do this development, this process, in collaboration, in partnership with councils. And particularly that structure, which is on page 25, and the process which is being suggested. And we said to them on those occasions, well, yeah, it's very nice of you to say those sort of things, but the documentation which you've got in front of us doesn't do that. The documentation you've got in front of us essentially has Kāinga Ora able to essentially accept proposals from various parties or create them themselves. We are no different in this than a private developer, in effect. And that to me is just fundamentally wrong. And that is a huge flaw in this legislation. So our submission has to say really, really strongly, we as a council, we engage with our communities. I mean, we are about to go through a massive engagement process, which we'll come to in a moment. We engage with our communities, and the whole thing about the shape of our cities is absolutely fundamental to what we do. We can't have a government agency just deciding unilaterally that it will rearrange a large part of our city. So that essentially is at the front end of the process, and that's why you've got some amended substantive in front of us. The front end of the process is we are insisting that we have to be part of that front end of the process of identifying where are the places where special development should occur, what their scope is, and how they get done. We're also the infrastructure provider, so it's really important that we are, we're comfortable with what the infrastructure that is quite likely to be passed on to us looks like and how it interfaces with our infrastructure. In the documentation as amended, it also, we've said to them, we are about to go through we're doing the planning for growth process. So it's a massive engagement process with our communities. We will go through our district plan, which is a massive engagement process with our communities. Once we get to the end of that, or at some point during that process, or once we get to the end of it, we can't have an entity which has had no involvement in that process whatsoever, unilaterally coming in and deciding that it's going to just do something completely different. So the invitation, as part of this, the invitation needs to go out to government and to its agencies to actually sit alongside us and to understand what we've done, to understand the engagement we've had with our communities, and to participate in that process. Let's invite them to make submissions to that process so that they get what we're trying to do, because we are trying to provide the growth for the growth that they want. But let's do it our way so that we actually shape the city in a way which respects the things which we value. So we met with Phil Twyford the other day, all the mayors of the region, and he took on board. He said, yep, no, we want to respect the things that you value about the city, but it doesn't come through in the legislation as the draft legislation. So we need to be absolutely insistent about that. The other thing which I know is going to be picked up in by way of amendment by, I think, Councillor Rush, is that is around our ability to do urban development. Councillor Rush isn't here anyway at the moment, so hopefully it might get picked up in an amendment by him or by somebody. So there's been a very small, I know Councillor Sparrow has agreed to second it, so maybe he'll move it if Councillor Rush isn't here. Welcome. And it's just this concept of, I know we've talked about having an urban development capacity in the city for a long time. It was one of those things which was going to be, we'd consulted on it, you know that, because we've already been briefed on that. We've been consulted on it. There was going to be a paper to put it into place in December 2016, and it was going to be in place and operative by 1st of July 2017. Well, there is no sign of it, because some people weren't very enthusiastic about it at the time. But I think I'd ask you to reflect on whether we actually want to be involved in this game, or whether we only want the government and the private sector to be involved in this game of actually delivering the city shaping. Because we will do the planning rules, but sometimes you've actually got to do something to actually make the planning happening, to put the planning into effect. So I think the key message there is to say to government, this is about partnership. Sometimes we will identify something we want to do. Can you give us the powers to be able to do that? And the compulsory acquisition is one of those. Now, I know compulsory acquisition is anathema to someone, I think to Councillor Pannett. However, if we say to the government, we're happy with you having compulsory acquisition powers, you can do whatever you like, maybe on behalf of a private developer, but we're not going to be part of the game, that would seem to be very silly. So the amendment I know that's coming is to say, actually, we want to be able to be involved in this. And it might well be it's Kaingaora and us working together in partnership. And that's the conversation I had with Andrew McKenzie, the Chief Executive of Kaingaora, and he said, yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. But the legislation doesn't say that. It says Kaingaora is the only delivery agency. So understand where they're coming from, but there are some significant flaws in that. I haven't actually picked up whether, because I didn't read the final bit, whether we've actually added things like the outer green belt to the town belt. Because we've said in our draft that we want to make sure that we protect the importance of significant land like the town belt, but we've forgotten the outer green belt, which is several times larger than it, so that would seem to be inconsistent. So I would hope that we can pick that up under a minor amendment if it hasn't already been done so. So pleased to move it, and thanks again to the officers for the work done and for the responses to the feedback on Tuesday. So I move.
Thank you, Mayor Foster. So you're not moving an amendment or anything pro forma, you're saying...
No, look, I'm happy that there's an amendment which Councillor Rush is going to move. I'm happy with that.
And are you seconding that, Councillor Condé? Would you like to speak? Cool, thank you. So over to you, Councillor Rush, now to move your amendment.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the team for helping with the draft here. So I think Mayor Foster covered this in a little bit of detail, but what we're looking to do in this submission is, first of all, to ensure that there's a genuine partnership between ourselves as the liaison with our community and with the government in the early stages of a development under this legislation. What we recognise, though, is that certain projects that are a high priority for Wellington may not be a high priority or will be down the ranks for the government agencies involved. And that might mean it stagnates and doesn't go forward. So what this amendment seeks to do is to propose that in those instances, then the powers vested in Kaingaroa could be devolved to local councils to undertake those sorts of projects. So
just to confirm, Kaingaroa would be 2 houses. Hopefully they're going to do more than
I've got no idea what it means. I don't know why we can't have... it's the Urban Development Authority, isn't it? Yeah, UDA, maybe that's easier. Anyway, yeah, so... Just keep going. I think I'd finished.
And who is seconding? Is it Councillor Sparrow you're seconding? Would you like to speak to this?
It makes a lot of sense. That's all I'll say, and I'm glad we've taken the apostrophe out of councils. Can we put it in after communities? Thank you.
Would you like to speak, Councillor Paul? You speak.
Confirm that the commission appointment stuff was put in there. Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, it has been. Yep, it's in the final.
Thank you.
Right. So, is there any more debate to the amendment? In which case, we need to vote on the amendment. All right. So, voting is open. No. You know what to do. So those that are not here.
That's one, Council.
Right, so that's carried. Thank you. So we're going to return to the substantive motion. Councillor Pennant.
Briefly, I would like to thank the dedicated staff who are up till midnight working on our amendments, and just talk to the Chief Executive about better process from a councillor end so that they can go to bed at a sensible time. So I'm very grateful that they have incorporated many of the amendments. Councillor Foster and I are Mayor Foster and I are in agreement on some things, so I appreciate the references to partnership and local democracy and character protection, obviously, which is an area of passion for me. So I'm glad that those changes have been made. I think this council has been pretty consistently clear on making sure that communities do have a say, possibly with the exception of the SHARs, which I'll get onto now. So I'm not going to be supporting this submission on philosophical grounds, and actually it may surprise you, I'm quite blue on one or two aspects here. I do have and consistently have had a fundamental problem with compulsory powers of acquisition. I introduced the Mayor to a new term. I stand on the libertarian left. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the state coming in and telling how to design cities. It gives them a bit too much power, and frankly, given their track record in the past, I'm particularly not keen, because I've had too much experience with that. But I think there just is a thing. Now but that's why I'm on the left, not the right. I do believe that communities should come together democratically and make decisions about what is best for the entire community. And housing obviously has been very problematic, where private rights have been exercised fully at the detriment of the benefit of the whole community. Nevertheless, I do find it a bit offensive for the government to be coming and telling private property owners what they should be doing with their property. I don't agree with it, and I think these powers are a bit heavy-handed. Nevertheless, I do appreciate the intents of the staff and my colleagues for trying to make this a bit better. I know that there's aspiration to do some good projects, and I hope that the projects will be good ones. But I think we have now had the experience of the SHARs, and that has been very difficult. The average development that I refer to at Erskine, Shelley Bay, has been a bit of a... Okay, it's been really difficult. And so this, for me, is a lesson in why you do need community input and good, robust processes, and why you need appeal rights in a democratic society, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, some of these powers just start to look like they're overriding them. So I won't support that, but I do appreciate the work that has been put in.
Would anyone else like to speak to this? Councillor Free.
Well, whether you support it or not, Councillor Pennant, I'm not sure that refusing, to support the submission is the right approach to actually, not supporting the actual bill in itself. I too feel very doubtful about this bill. I consider we've been badly burned by the experience of Asher, and I just can't see enough evidence that the government's learned from those mistakes that needed to be learned. But I don't see that not supporting this submission as a way to actually send the right signal. I think when we put things out to consultation, we actually appreciate hearing from our communities, with their concerns. If we actually carried this to its logical extreme, if everyone actually refused to vote for this submission because we didn't like the bill itself, we might not be saying anything to the government. So I'll be supporting the submission. I agree with the comments that, the staff have really listened to our previous debate, incorporated a huge amount of what we wanted to see in it. It is what it is. I'll be voting for it to go forward to the government, and hopefully it won't be the end of the discussion.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Just getting the wording.
So I just have an amendment. When you say supported by officers, it's actually drafted by officers, thanks to David Chick. It's just following up the question I asked on Tuesday for there to be a bit more emphasis on the use of land, inefficiently used land. So the state has a lot of land that it doesn't use well here in Wellington, as does the City Council, and as do a whole lot of private owners. This is really just about saying we want the state to take its role and making sure that this land is being used to its full potential. And I even heard about an approach that's adopted in other countries where if land isn't used properly and housing is in desperate need, that it gets turned into parks. And obviously this is not a call to go that far, but we do have a housing crisis. And I'm very conscious as a housing portfolio holder, but also of the fact that people who don't live here yet don't have a voice around this table. And we desperately need more affordable housing in Wellington. And it's hard sometimes. Sometimes communities don't like affordable housing coming near them. And it's difficult. And unfortunately, sometimes we need to be brave and stare down those objections because we do need more affordable housing in our city. So I'm also very pleased to see the sort of watered down comments around the labour market issues in relation to consenting officers and those staff, and making sure that rather than condemning the public service for paying higher wages, that we actually attempt to work with them and deal with the workforce planning issues, because it's in all our interests to have well trained and well rewarded staff doing this very important work.
Do you have a seconder? Who would like to second this? Councillor Matthews. Do that. Would you like to speak to this? Would anyone else like to speak to this amendment?
It looks as though, I don't know how it's been written, probably as good as my writing, but it looks some of those words don't quite make sense unless that was intended.
Do you just want to quickly read over it? David Chick drafted it for me.
A partnered approach ensures that these holdings can be invested to ensure they are reaching their full potential. Is that what you meant?
Investigated.
I was going to say. Yeah, okay, right. Landholders can be investigated to ensure they are reaching the government houses.
English is my second language.
Gibberish is the first, isn't it?
Sorry.
Sort.
For the best.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
I've got a question which Councillor for Science might be able to answer and write a reply, but just is this relevant to this particular submission on this bill? I agree with the sentiments, but I'm just asking, is this relevant to what we're being asked of? So you can answer that and you write a reply if you like. Yeah.
Yes.
Is my write a reply now?
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to the debate? Councillor Sparrow.
Sorry, this is actually my fault.
Just very brief. It should be is sought, shouldn't it? And emphasis is sought.
Yeah.
Is there any further debate around the content of the amendment? I'm not going to worry about that right now. It looks like we're ready for a right of reply.
Look, just very briefly, I would say that it is intricately linked to the objectives of this bill, and also generally about asking the government to look in its own portfolio of assets before trying to tell the private sector or to compulsorily acquire other land. It's to really say you have a role in this as well. It's not just other landholders. And I'd also assert that the City Council does too. So I think it is linked to the complex urban development issues that this bill is attempting to address.
Point of order. Cyrus, I think it should say best outcomes are sought.
That's not a point of order, but you can say you've got a question around something. Yes, we're going to vote on this now. Lots of grammar people here. It's good. Right, voting is open. And that's carried unanimously. That's right. So we're back to the substantive motion now. Is there any further debate on that? Fantastic. Substantive, we're going to vote on that. And we'll vote on it all together. The voting is open. It is now.
No, it's not.
Oh, you can do a right of
something.
reply. It's because I covered it. You don't need to do a right of reply.
Just very quickly. Just in response to Councillor Pannett, I just wanted to encourage you, sometimes, if we make no submission whatsoever, our voice will be unheard. And what is the point in doing that? If you think that the bill's got flaws in it, then this is our opportunity to say so. And we're saying so actually more stridently than we did than the original draft. We're saying that there are fundamental flaws in this legislation. And look, I know that you've said you don't like compulsory powers, and I understand that issue there. But at the moment, the way that the bill is written is they are going to exercise compulsory powers. We will have diddly squat ability to do anything about it. What we're saying is we need to be involved in this at the front end. We need to be engaging with our communities, so at least there is a conversation with our communities so they know which bits of land are in question. Because otherwise, if it goes the way they're going, they will design it, and then simply they will say, this is what we're going to do. There'll be some perfunctory consultation. I mean, look at the 10 to 20 days. We're arguing about whether we get to get 20 days to respond. At the moment we get 10 days to respond. What sort of response is that? So this is saying that we have to have a say, Iona, and I think to not be involved in this is cut off nose to spite face to me. Yeah, look, I think you should make a submission yourself in person.
All right, so we're going to vote now. Thank you for your right of reply. Sorry, I didn't mean to miss it. I did cover it again, and it's been a long meeting. So voting is open. A long 2 meetings. All right, so that's carried. And that is Kua Mutu tēnei meeting. E tū mō te Karakia mutunga. Yeah, after. Yeah. Just doing Karakia at the moment. Unu hia ki te tapu nui. Wātia, te māma, te nāko, te inana, te wairua, I te ara taka. Koea, ake ki runga, ki ai, kua wā, ngā mihi. And I'll just hand over to Mayor Foster just has a...
Yeah, look, thanks colleagues. I think there's been some... we're very happy having everybody here. In fact, we want everybody here for this one. Councillors, some of the, if you might say, the language or the tone that was used in some of the discussion today has obviously upset a few people. We'll probably, a few, I'm not going to point fingers at anybody individually, but I think the request is from collectively as your colleagues. I mean, we all get damaged by doing that. I know there's been some comments made about some of the things which are said post the last meeting as well. So I'd just like you to reflect on what you say and how you say it to people. Robust debate about issues